I need to tell you something before you sign that." The words left Clara's mouth before she could stop them. Across the restaurant floor, Ethan Vale, billionaire, single father, and the man whose forgotten phone she held, stared at her like she'd lost her mind. In 12 hours, he would lose everything: his company, his father's legacy, the future he'd promised his daughter. And the only person who could save him was a waitress he'd barely looked at twice. This is the story of one phone call that changed two broken lives forever. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence cost money. Not actual silence. There was always the soft clink of crystal, the murmur of important people saying important things, the occasional laugh that sounded like it had been professionally polished. But the kind of silence where nobody asked questions, where the staff moved like ghosts and the clientele paid for the privilege of being left alone with their thoughts, their deals, their perfectly prepared $40 appetizers. Clara Bennett had worked at Meridian for 3 years, and she'd learned the silence well. She moved between tables with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd made an art of being overlooked. 30 years old, thin in a way that suggested she forgot to eat more than she remembered to, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that watched everything, while seeming to see nothing important. Her uniform was always perfect. Her smile was always slight. Her presence was always temporary. The other servers said she was too quiet. The kitchen staff said she was weird. The manager said she was reliable, which in this business meant she showed up, did her job, and didn't cause problems. None of them knew what she'd been before this. That was the point. Tuesday nights were slow. The weekend rush was a distant memory, and the pre-weekend buildup hadn't started yet. Just a handful of tables scattered across the main dining room, each occupied by someone who looked like they had somewhere more important to be. Table 7 had been occupied for 90 minutes by a man who'd barely touched his food. Ethan Vale. Clara knew his name because he'd made a reservation, and because his credit card sat on the payment tray beside his untouched dessert, and because his face occasionally showed up in business magazines left behind by other customers. 32, dark hair starting to show gray at the temples, expensive suit that he wore like armor, and the kind of exhaustion in his eyes that came from carrying weight nobody else could see. He'd been on his phone the entire time. Not unusual. Half the people who came to Meridian conducted entire business deals between courses. But there was something different about the way this man sat hunched over his screen, jaw tight, fingers moving across the glass with the intensity of someone diffusing a bomb rather than reading emails. He'd ordered the salmon, sent back the wine, asked for water with no ice, then never drank it. When Clara had checked on him, twice, with the careful politeness that she'd perfected, he'd waved her off without looking up. Not rude, exactly. Just absent, like she was a sound his brain had learned to filter out. Clara didn't take it personally. She'd been filtered out by better people than him. She was wiping down the service station when she noticed the phone. It sat on table 7 like a ticking bomb, black and sleek and humming with incoming calls. The screen lit up once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She glanced toward the restrooms, then back at the phone. Ethan Vale had stood abruptly 15 minutes ago, leaving his napkin on his chair and his phone face down on the table, and disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. The phone buzzed again. This time it didn't stop. Clara looked at the hostess stand. Maria was dealing with a walk-in couple. Looked at the bar. James was pulling bottles for an order. Looked at the manager's office. Dark. The phone kept ringing. It wasn't her business. That was the first rule of places like this. Don't get involved. Serve the food, clear the plates, smile politely, go home. Don't touch customer belongings. Don't answer customer phones. Don't insert yourself into customer lives. But something about the persistence of those calls made Clara's stomach tighten with old instincts she'd spent years trying to bury. She moved to table 7, picked up dessert plates that didn't need clearing yet, giving herself a reason to be there. The phone screen lit up again. She could see the caller ID, Richard Chen. Legal. Legal. Calling at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, calling repeatedly. That wasn't a social call. The phone went dark. 5 seconds later, it lit up again. Same name. Clara set down the plates. Her hand hovered over the phone. Don't do this, part of her whispered. You know better. You know what happens when you get involved. But the other part, The part she'd tried to kill, starve, bury under 3 years of serving food and keeping her head down. That part was already reading the tension in those repeated calls like a language she'd once spoken fluently. Something was wrong. She picked up the phone. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe that was just her hand shaking. She swiped to answer before she could talk herself out of it, before the ringing could stop, before she could remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a man's voice, sharp with urgency. Ethan, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. Where the hell have you been? This isn't... Clara started. Listen, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need you to listen. I pulled the Whitmore contract to do a final review like you asked, and there's something buried in the annexes. Section 12, subsection 4. There's a liquidation clause that doesn't match what we negotiated. Clara's breath caught. Liquidation clause. The words hit her brain like keys in a lock she'd thought she'd thrown away. I'm not... She tried again. If you sign this tomorrow, they can force a full asset evaluation at any time within the first 18 months. Ethan, are you hearing me? They can trigger a buyout based on their own assessment of value. This thing is a fucking trap. The lawyer's voice was tight with the kind of panic that came from finding a landmine after someone had already started walking across the field. Clara knew that panic. She'd lived it once, before everything fell apart. Her mind was already moving, pulling up half-buried knowledge like muscle memory. Liquidation clauses, asset evaluations, forced buyouts, the kind of predatory contract language that looked clean on the surface and lethal under a microscope. What section did you say? The words left her mouth before her brain caught up. Another pause. Who is this? Clara looked toward the restrooms again. No sign of Ethan Vale. He left his phone at his table. I work here. But you said section 12. I need to speak to Ethan, right now. He's not available, but I'm listening. What exactly does this clause say? I can't discuss confidential client business with... Who are you? Clara closed her eyes. This was insane. She should hang up, find Ethan Vale, hand him his phone, walk away. But Richard Chen's voice carried the same edge she'd heard in her own voice years ago, when she'd been the one calling clients in the middle of the night, trying to save them from their own blind spots. My name is Clara. I used to work in contract law. The lie of omission burned, but she pushed through it. If you tell me what you're looking at, I can relay it when he comes back. Used to. It's complicated. What does section 12 say? She could hear Richard weighing his options, time ticking, the sound of papers shuffling. Subsection 4, paragraph 8, he said finally. In the event of any material change in company valuation, including but not limited to market volatility, operational disruption, or third-party assessment, Party B reserves the right to initiate a complete liquidation assessment based on fair market value as determined by an independent evaluator selected by Party B. Clara's stomach dropped. Party B chooses the evaluator. Yeah, which means they choose the valuation. Which means they can claim any number they want, force a buyout at a fraction of actual worth, and legally strip the assets. Clara's voice had gone flat, professional. The tone of someone reading an X-ray and seeing cancer. How much is Ethan investing? $200 million, 40% stake in a joint infrastructure project. If they trigger that clause, he loses everything. Clara was pacing now, moving on instinct, her brain sliding back into a groove it hadn't touched in years. What's the time frame on signing? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., 12 hours. Does Ethan know about this clause? I just found it. I've been trying to call him for the last half hour. This contract is 60 pages deep with 4 annexes. Nobody catches everything on first review, but this is deliberate. This is hidden. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. A contract too dense to read properly. A signature deadline that left no time for real due diligence. A clause buried so deep that even careful lawyers could miss it. And a liquidation trigger so broad that the other party could pull it whenever they wanted. This wasn't a business deal. It was a mugging in a boardroom. Clara looked up and saw Ethan Vale walking back across the dining room. He moved like a man carrying lead weights, shoulders tight, expression distant. His jacket was off, thrown over one arm. His tie was loosened. He looked like someone who'd spent the last 15 minutes staring at himself in a mirror and not liking what he saw. "He's coming back," Clara said into the phone. "I'll tell him to call you." "Wait, who did you say you were?" Clara hung up. Ethan reached the table and stopped, his eyes landing on his phone in her hand. For a moment, he just stared at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time all night. His expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something harder. "Can I help you?" His voice was polite in the way expensive lawyers were polite right before they destroyed you. Clara held out the phone. "Your attorney called. Richard Chen. He said it's urgent." Ethan took the phone slowly, his fingers brushing hers. "You answered my phone." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "It wouldn't stop ringing," Clara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I thought it might be important." "So you answered it?" "Yes." "Do you make a habit of answering other people's phones?" The edge in his voice was sharper now. Clara recognized it. The tone of someone whose privacy had been violated, whose space had been invaded, who was looking for a target for frustration that had nothing to do with her. She should apologize. Smile. Step back. Disappear. Instead, she said, "He told me about Section 12. Ethan went very still. "Excuse me?" "Your Whitmore contract. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 8. There's a liquidation clause that gives Party B the right to force asset evaluation using their own independent evaluator. If you sign that tomorrow, they can strip your company whenever they want." The silence that followed was the kind that preceded earthquakes. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A sharpening, a recalibration, like a camera lens snapping into focus. "How do you know that?" His voice was very quiet now. "Your lawyer told me." Richard discussed a confidential contract with a waitress. "I told him I used to work in contract law." Claire's hands were shaking. She folded them behind her back. He was panicking. He needed to tell someone. "Used to." "Yes." "Why used to?" Claire's throat tightened. "That's not relevant." "It's relevant if you're giving me legal advice based on a 30-second phone call." Ethan took a step closer. He was taller than he'd seemed sitting down, and there was something in his proximity that made Clara want to back up. She didn't. "What firm did you work for?" "I didn't work for a firm." "Law school?" "Columbia. I didn't finish." "Why not?" The question landed like a slap. Clara felt the old shame rise up, hot and familiar, the story she'd spent 3 years running from. Damian Whitmore's smirk. The plagiarism accusation. The investigation that cleared her too late. The legal career that evaporated while she was still trying to understand what had happened. "I'm just trying to help," she said instead. "I didn't ask for your help." "No, but you need it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about what I need." "I know you're about to sign a contract that will bankrupt you." "Based on what? A 30-second phone call?" "Based on the fact that your lawyer called you 15 times in 20 minutes and used words like trap and forced buyout." Clara's voice was rising now, frustration bleeding through the careful control. "Based on the fact that you've been sitting at this table for 90 minutes looking like you're about to sign your own death warrant. Based on—" "That's enough." Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. Clara stopped mid-sentence. Around them, the restaurant had gone quiet. Not actually quiet. The same soft sounds, the same murmured conversations, but the quality of attention had changed. Other diners were glancing over. Maria at the hostess stand was staring. James, behind the bar, had stopped pouring. Clara felt her face flush. This was it. This was the moment where she got fired. Where she broke the one rule that mattered. Don't get involved. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have answered your phone. I'll get your check." She turned to leave. "Wait." The word stopped her mid-step. She looked back. Ethan was staring at his phone screen, his expression unreadable. He scrolled through something, messages, maybe, or missed calls. When he looked up, some of the hardness had drained from his face. "Richard called 16 times in the last hour," he said slowly. "I had my phone on silent. I didn't see." Clara said nothing. "If what you're saying is true, if there's really a clause like that buried in this contract—" He stopped. Started again. "How would you hide something like that?" How would you make it invisible? And there it was. The question Clara had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. The question that meant he was listening. You bury it in technical language, she said. You put it in an annex instead of the main contract. You surround it with standard boilerplate so it looks like every other protection clause. You make the trigger conditions so broad that they seem meaningless until someone actually pulls it. And you count on the other party being too rushed, too trusting, or too tired to catch it. Ethan was very quiet. And if someone did catch it, he asked, you'd have about 12 hours to pull out of the deal or renegotiate from scratch. 12 hours. If you're signing at 9 a.m. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her the way he hadn't all night. Clara felt exposed under that gaze, like he was reading the parts of her she'd tried to hide, the intelligence she'd buried, the person she used to be. What's your name? He asked finally. Clara Bennett. Clara. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. How long have you been a waitress? 3 years. And before that? I told you, law school, until I wasn't. Why? The question sat between them like a live wire. Clara could give him the short version, the easy lie about changing careers or losing interest. Or she could tell him the truth. Tell him about Damian Whitmore and the plagiarism accusation that had destroyed her reputation before she'd even started building one. Tell him how she'd spent 6 months fighting to clear her name and succeeded only in proving that justice and truth weren't the same thing. Tell him how she'd ended up here, serving food to people who didn't see her, trying to forget she'd ever been anything else. Tell him that the family trying to trap his company was the same family that had already destroyed her life. It's complicated, she said instead. Ethan studied her face like he was looking for cracks in a facade. Did Richard really tell you about Section 12? Yes. And you understood what he was describing? Yes. In 30 seconds? I'm good at reading contracts. I used to be anyway. Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down at it, then back at her. Something in his expression had shifted. The anger was gone, replaced by something more dangerous, curiosity. My daughter is 5 years old, he said suddenly. Her name is Sophie. She doesn't remember my father. He died when she was 2. But she knows his picture. She knows he built the company I'm running now. She knows that when she's older, it's supposed to be hers. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. This deal with Whitmore Industries was supposed to secure our future, Ethan continued. Diversify our assets. Create stable long-term growth. I've been working on it for 8 months. My entire board approved it. My financial advisors approved it. My lawyers, including Richard, approved it. Until tonight. Until tonight, Ethan's voice was hollow. If you're right, but there's really a trap buried in this contract, then I've spent 8 months walking into an ambush. And the only person who caught it was a waitress who answered my phone. The way he said waitress made Clara's spine stiffen, not quite mocking, but close enough. I should let you call your lawyer, she said. You should. Ethan didn't move. But first I want you to tell me something. Why did you answer my phone, really? Clara met his eyes. Because it wouldn't stop ringing. Because your lawyer sounded desperate. Because I know what it sounds like when someone's trying to stop a disaster and running out of time. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. They stared at each other across the table. Around them, Meridian continued its quiet Tuesday evening, crystal clinking, conversations murmuring, the world turning at its usual expensive pace. But in this small space, between this man and this woman, something had shifted. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time he answered it. Richard? Yeah, I know. I got your messages. He paused, listening. His eyes never left Clara's face. No, I haven't signed anything yet. Listen, I need you to pull the full contract right now. I'm coming to the office. We're going through every page, every annex, every clause. I don't care if it takes all night. Another pause. Because someone just told me we missed something. And if they're right, this whole deal is poison. He hung up. I need to go, he said to Clara. But I want your number. What? Your number. I want it. Clara's heart was hammering. Why? Because if you're right about this clause, you just saved my company. And if you're wrong, I need to know why you lied. Ethan pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card, and held it out. Either way, we're not done talking. Clara took the card. It was heavy stock, embossed lettering. Ethan Vale, CEO, Vale Industries. A phone number, an email address, an office location she'd probably never visit. I didn't lie, she said quietly. Then prove it. If Richard confirms what you told me, I'll call you tomorrow, and you're going to tell me how a waitress knows more about predatory contract law than my entire legal team. He dropped $200 bills on the table, triple what the meal cost, and walked out. Clara stood there for a long time, holding his business card, feeling the weight of what she'd just done settle over her like a coat she'd thought she'd thrown away. Maria appeared at her elbow. What the hell was that? I don't know, Clara said honestly, but she did know. She knew exactly what that was. It was the past catching up. It was the person she used to be, clawing her way back to the surface. It was every instinct she'd spent 3 years suppressing, flooding back all at once. It was the beginning of something she couldn't stop. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about Ethan Vale's exhausted eyes and his daughter's future, and the way Richard Chen's voice had cracked with panic. She answered. Clara Bennett? A different voice this time. Older, harder. Yes? My name is Marcus Whitmore. I believe you just had an interesting conversation with Ethan Vale about a contract that doesn't concern you. Clara's blood went cold. I don't know what you're... Don't insult my intelligence. I have someone at that restaurant who watched the whole thing. Marcus's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. I know you answered his phone. I know what his lawyer told you, and I know you're about to make a very stupid mistake. Clara looked around the dining room, tried to spot who was watching her, failed. Stay out of this, Marcus continued. Ethan Vale's business dealings have nothing to do with you, and if you're smart, you'll keep it that way. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who knows what happens to people who interfere in matters above their pay grade. A pause. I know who you are, Clara. I know what happened at Columbia. I know whose son ended your career before it started. Do you really want to go through that again? The line went dead. Clara stood in the middle of Meridian, holding a dead phone and a business card, feeling the careful life she'd built cracking apart. Across the room, Maria was still staring. James had stopped pretending not to listen, and somewhere in the night, Ethan Vale was racing to his office to tear apart a contract that might already be killing him. Clara looked down at the business card, at Ethan's number. She thought about Sophie, 5 years old, who didn't remember her grandfather, about Ethan's exhausted eyes and the weight he carried, about Richard Chen's panic and Marcus Whitmore's threat. She thought about Damian Whitmore's smirk 3 years ago, when he'd looked at her across a hearing room and known he'd won, and she thought about the clause buried in Section 12, waiting like a landmine. Clara pulled out her phone and typed a text to the number on Ethan's card. If Richard confirms the clause, I can help. But you need to know something first. The Whitmores destroyed my life once already. If we do this, we're not just fighting a contract. We're fighting them. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. Then she went back to work, clearing tables and refilling water glasses and smiling politely at people who didn't see her, waiting for an answer that would either save her or destroy her all over again. The answer came at midnight. Clara was home by then, in the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. Her phone lit up the darkness. Richard confirmed it. The clause is there. You were right. Then 30 seconds later, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. We have 2 hours before I'm supposed to sign, and I need to understand what I'm really looking at. Clara typed back, I work breakfast shift. I can't. The response was immediate. Call in sick. I'll pay you whatever you'd lose. This is important. She stared at the screen. This was insane. She should say no. Should protect the quiet life she'd built, the safety of invisibility, the peace of being nobody. But Richard Chen's voice echoed in her head. This thing is a fucking trap. And Marcus Whitmore's. I know who you are, Clara. She typed, 7 a.m. I'll be there. Then she lay back and tried to sleep, knowing she wouldn't, knowing that tomorrow she'd walk back into the world that had chewed her up and spit her out, knowing that this time she was choosing it. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Vale was reading a contract and seeing his future dissolve. Somewhere else, Marcus Whitmore was making phone calls, tightening screws, preparing for a fight. And in a tiny apartment in a forgotten corner of Manhattan, Clara Bennett stared at the ceiling and felt the person she used to be waking up inside her, stretching, remembering what it felt like to matter. The silence in her apartment was different from the silence at Meridian. This silence was honest, and it was about to shatter. Clara didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching the numbers on her phone tick forward, 12:47, 1:23, 2:08, while her mind ran through every possible way tomorrow could go wrong. By 3 a.m., she'd given up pretending and sat at her kitchen table with instant coffee and the kind of silence that amplified every doubt she'd ever had. What the hell was she doing? She wasn't a lawyer anymore, wasn't even a law student. She was a waitress who'd answered a phone she had no business touching, and now she was about to walk into a billionaire's office and pretend she knew what she was talking about. Except she did know. That was the problem. Her fingers itched for a contract to read, legal language to parse, problems to solve. 3 years of serving food hadn't killed that part of her brain, just buried it. And now it was awake and hungry, and she didn't know how to put it back to sleep. At 5:30 a.m., she called Meridian and left a voicemail for the morning manager. Stomach flu. Very sorry. Would make it up on her next shift. The lie tasted worse than the coffee. She showered, put on the only professional clothes she still owned, a black skirt and white blouse that had survived 3 years in the back of her closet, and stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked like someone playing dress-up, like a kid wearing her mother's clothes to a job interview. She looked like someone who didn't belong. At 6:45 a.m., she stood outside Vale Industries headquarters in Midtown, a glass and steel tower that probably cost more than every apartment building on her block combined. The lobby was already humming with early arrivals, men and women in suits that fit properly, carrying briefcases and confidence, moving like they owned the air they breathed. Clara's hands were shaking. She almost turned around, almost walked away, almost chose safety. Then her phone buzzed. Ethan. Security has your name, 47th floor, no going back now. The elevator ride up felt like falling in reverse. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who looked terrified and trying not to show it. The woman next to her, perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect expression of bored competence, didn't even glance her direction. Floor 47 was all glass walls and expensive furniture and the kind of quiet that came from soundproofing and money. A receptionist with a smile that didn't reach her eyes directed Clara down a hallway to a corner office where light poured in from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that was just starting to wake up. Ethan Vale sat behind a desk covered in paper. He looked worse than he had last night. Still wearing the same shirt, tie gone, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. There were coffee cups scattered across every surface, and the particular kind of chaos that came from someone tearing their own life apart to see what was underneath. Richard Chen sat across from him, Asian, mid-40s, expensive suit that looked slept in, and eyes red from either exhaustion or rage or both. 2 other people Clara didn't recognize occupied the other chairs, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and reading glasses, and a younger man furiously typing on a laptop. They all looked up when Clara entered. "This is her?" Richard asked. Ethan stood. "Clara Bennett. She's the one who took your call." The room went very quiet. Clara felt 4 pairs of eyes evaluating her, her cheap blouse, her nervous hands, the way she didn't quite fit in this space. "You told me she worked in contract law," Richard said slowly. "I said she used to." "She's a waitress." "Yes." Richard looked at Ethan like he'd lost his mind. "You dragged us all in here at 6 in the morning because a waitress answered your phone?" "I dragged you in here because she was right about Section 12, Ethan said evenly, "which none of us caught until 10 hours before I was supposed to sign." The silver-haired woman set down the paper she'd been reading. "Mr. Vale, I appreciate creative thinking, but this is a $200 million deal. We can't afford—" "Show her the contract," Ethan interrupted. "Excuse me?" "Show her the contract, all of it. I want to see what she finds." The woman, Clara guessed general counsel from the way she carried herself, looked like she'd been asked to hand nuclear codes to a stranger. "This is highly confidential. Margaret," Ethan's voice cut through the objection like a blade. Richard spent 3 months reviewing this contract and missed a clause that could bankrupt us. Our entire legal team signed off on language that was designed to destroy us. Either our lawyers are incompetent or the Whitmores are better at hiding traps than we are at finding them. He looked at Clara. She found it in 30 seconds. She heard Richard describe it over the phone, Margaret countered. That's not the same as, then test her. Give her the contract. See what else she finds. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either violence or surrender. Margaret pulled a thick binder from the stack on Ethan's desk and held it out toward Clara. You have 1 hour. Tell us what you see. Clara took the binder. It was heavy, 60 pages of dense legal text plus annexes, exhibits, addendums. The kind of document that took weeks to draft and months to negotiate and could still hide a knife between the clauses. She sat down in the empty chair and opened to page 1. The room watched her read. Clara had forgotten what it felt like to do this, to sink into contract language like diving underwater, where the surface noise disappeared and everything became structure and pattern and hidden meaning. Her brain shifted gears, pulling up frameworks she'd learned at Columbia, techniques she'd practiced until they became reflex. She read fast, not skimming, actually reading, processing, mapping the relationships between sections. Her pen moved across the legal pad, noting references, flagging inconsistencies, building a mental model of what this contract actually did versus what it claimed to do. Around her, the office slowly came to life. Phones started ringing, voices filtered in from the hallway. Someone brought in more coffee, but Clara barely noticed. She was deep in the language now, following threads that wove through seemingly unrelated sections, spotting the places where definitions shifted subtly, where carve-outs created loopholes, where the Whitmores had buried their real intentions under layers of standard legal boilerplate. It was like reading a murder mystery written in slow motion. 40 minutes later, she set down her pen. You can't sign this, she said. Ethan leaned forward. What did you find? Clara flipped back through her notes. Section 12 is the most obvious problem, the liquidation clause Richard caught, but it's not the only one. Section 8 contains a non-compete provision that's broader than it looks. The definition of competing business interests includes any company operating in infrastructure development, which means if you sign this, you can't invest in anything adjacent to your current business without Whitmore approval. That's standard, Margaret said. Non-competes protect both parties from... It's not standard when the definition is this vague, Clara interrupted. Infrastructure development could mean anything. Roads, utilities, telecommunications, real estate. They've written it broad enough that they can claim almost any investment competes with the joint venture, which means you'd need their permission to grow your own company. Richard was flipping through his copy of the contract. She's right. Look at the definition in Section 2, subsection B. Any business venture involving the development, maintenance, or operation of physical or digital infrastructure systems. That's incredibly broad. It gets worse, Clara continued. Section 19 has a clause about dispute resolution. All disagreements go to binding arbitration using a panel selected from a pre-approved list. Want to guess who controls the list? Whitmore, Ethan said quietly. 3 arbitrators. Whitmore gets to pick 2. You pick 1. Majority rules. Which means if they ever trigger the liquidation clause or claim you violated the non-compete, they control the entire dispute process. The younger man at the laptop had stopped typing. That's not how binding arbitration is supposed to work. It's not, Clara agreed. But it's how they've structured it, and because you agreed to arbitration instead of litigation, you'd have no right to appeal. Their decision is final. Margaret was reading now, really reading, her expression darkening with each page. How did we miss this? Because it's designed to be missed, Clara said. Look at how it's organized. The liquidation clause is in Section 12, buried in an annex. The non-compete definition is in Section 2, which looks like standard definitions. The arbitration panel selection is in Section 19, separated from the general dispute resolution language. You'd have to read all 3 sections together to see how they connect. And most people don't read contracts that way. But you do, Ethan said. Clara met his eyes. I used to. Why? The question hung in the air. Claire could feel everyone waiting for an answer. She could tell them about Colombia, about the contract law seminar where she'd learned to read documents like crime scenes, about Professor Hernandez, who taught her that the most dangerous clauses were always the ones that looked boring. She could tell them about Damian Whitmore. Instead, she said, "Because I'm good at finding things people want to hide." Richard set down his copy of the contract. "Even if everything you're saying is correct, and I think it is, we're supposed to sign in 90 minutes. We can't renegotiate an entire contract in 90 minutes. No, Ethan said, but we can refuse to sign. And lose the deal entirely, Margaret said. Mr. Vale, we've invested 8 months and considerable resources in this partnership. If we don't walk away now, we lose the company. Ethan's voice was hard. That's what you're telling me, right? If I sign this contract as written, the Whitmores can trigger a forced buyout whenever they want, claim I violated a non-compete I didn't know I was agreeing to, and control the entire dispute process so I have no recourse. Is that correct? Silence. Is that correct? Ethan repeated. Yes, Margaret said finally. That's correct. Ethan stood and walked to the windows. Outside, Manhattan was fully awake now, cars streaming through streets, people flooding sidewalks, the city grinding forward on its usual Tuesday morning momentum. Somewhere down there, Sophie was probably eating breakfast before school. Somewhere else, the Whitmores were preparing for a 9 a.m. signing that would never happen. Call them, Ethan said without turning around. Tell them we're not signing today. Tell them we need more time to review. They'll ask why, Richard said. Tell them we found issues that need clarification. They'll know someone caught the traps. Good. Ethan turned back to face the room. Let them know. Let them understand that we're not the easy target they thought we were. Margaret closed her binder with a sound like a gunshot. Mr. Vale, with all due respect, this is a massive decision based on 1 hour of analysis by someone we just met. Perhaps we should take more time to— We don't have more time, Ethan interrupted. We have 90 minutes before I was supposed to hand them 40% of my company and the legal right to take the rest whenever they wanted. So no, Margaret, we're not taking more time. We're killing the deal. And doing what instead? The younger man asked. We structured our entire expansion strategy around this partnership. If we pull out now, we're back to square one. Then we go back to square one, Ethan said. Better than going to zero. He looked at Clara. She was still sitting with the contract open in front of her, pen in hand, looking like she was waiting for permission to speak. What would you do? He asked her. Everyone turned. What would I do? Clara repeated. If this was your company, your decision, what would you do right now? Clara glanced at the others, at Richard's exhausted skepticism, at Margaret's barely concealed hostility, at the younger man's confused evaluation. They were all thinking the same thing. Who the hell was she to advise a CEO on a $200 million deal? She was nobody. A waitress who'd answered a phone. A failed law student who'd spent 3 years hiding from the world that had chewed her up. But Ethan wasn't asking them. He was asking her. I'd find out why they did this, Clara said slowly. This contract isn't just aggressive, it's predatory. They spent 8 months negotiating terms that look reasonable on the surface but are designed to trap you. That takes planning, resources, intention. Nobody goes to this much effort unless they want something specific. They want my company, Ethan said. Maybe, or maybe they want to make sure you can't compete with them. Or maybe this is personal. Clara hesitated. Either way, I'd want to know if you're the only target or if they've done this before. The room went very quiet. What do you mean, done this before? Richard asked. Contracts like this don't get written overnight, Clara said. The language is too sophisticated. The traps are too well hidden. If the Whitmores are this good at predatory drafting, they've practiced, which means there might be other deals, other companies they've trapped the same way. Ethan was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. How would we find out? Public filings, court records, business databases. If they've used these same clauses in other contracts, there might be a pattern. And if other companies signed deals like this and later got destroyed, we'd have proof they're running a systematic operation, Richard finished. Not just aggressive negotiation, actual fraud. Maybe, Clara said carefully, but it would take time to investigate, and access to legal databases I don't have anymore. We have access, Margaret said. She'd been quiet during this exchange, but now she was looking at Clara with something that might have been grudging respect. If we're really going to kill this deal, we need ammunition, evidence that the Whitmores are operating in bad faith. It might not exist, Clara warned. They might be too careful to leave patterns. Or they might be arrogant, Ethan said. Arrogant enough to use the same playbook multiple times because it keeps working. He walked back to his desk and picked up his phone. Richard, call the Whitmores. Tell them we need to postpone. Don't give details. Margaret, I want you and your team to start pulling every public contract associated with Whitmore Industries for the last 5 years. Look for similar language, similar structures. Clara, he stopped. Everyone looked at her. I need you to stay, Ethan said. I need you to teach my lawyers how to read contracts the way you do, how to spot these traps, how to think like someone who's trying to hide a knife in legal language. Clara's stomach dropped. Mr. Vale, I'm not qualified to— You found in 1 hour what we missed in 3 months, Ethan interrupted. That makes you the most qualified person in this room. Will you stay? It was phrased as a question, but Clara heard the weight behind it. This wasn't just about one contract anymore. This was about a company, a future, a little girl named Sophie who didn't remember her grandfather. This was about walking back into the world that had destroyed her. I have a shift at noon, she said quietly. Call in sick again. I'll pay you for the day. Hell, I'll pay you for the week. Name your price. It's not about money. Then what is it about? Clara looked at the contract spread across the desk, at the pages of dense text hiding traps like landmines, at Richard's exhausted face and Margaret's cautious hope and the younger man's obvious confusion. She thought about Marcus Whitmore's voice on the phone last night. I know who you are, Clara. She thought about Damien's smirk 3 years ago. She thought about every table she'd cleared, every smile she'd forced, every time she'd made herself invisible to avoid the pain of being seen. If I do this, she said slowly, the Whitmores will know. They already know I talked to you last night. If I keep helping, they'll come after me. Then I'll protect you, Ethan said. You can't. Watch me. The certainty in his voice was either reassuring or terrifying. Clara couldn't tell which. I need to make a call, she said finally. Ethan gestured to an empty office across the hall. Clara walked over on legs that felt disconnected from her body, closed the door, and dialed Meridian. The morning manager picked up on the 3rd ring. Clara, you sound better. Think you'll make it in after all? No, Clara said. Actually, I need to take some time off. Maybe a week. I have a family emergency. Another lie. They were piling up now. A week? Clara, we're already short-staffed. If you're not dying, I really need you to— I quit. The words came out before Clara could stop them, before she could think, before she could choose safety. You what? I quit. I'm sorry. I know the timing is terrible, but I can't work there anymore. She hung up before the manager could respond, stood there holding her phone, feeling the last 3 years of careful invisibility shatter like glass. When she walked back into Ethan's office, everyone was on their phones or laptops, moving with the controlled chaos of people who'd just been given a mission. Richard was speaking tersely to someone about postponing the signing. Margaret was typing rapidly, pulling up database searches. The younger man was making notes on a whiteboard that had appeared from somewhere. Ethan looked up when Clara entered. You staying? I just quit my job, Clara said, so I guess I don't have much choice. Something that might have been a smile crossed Ethan's face. Margaret, set Clara up with a workstation and access to our legal databases. Richard, I want you working with her to map out the Whitmore contracts. Look for patterns, repeated language, anything that suggests systematic fraud. What are you going to do? Richard asked. I'm going to call some friends, Ethan said. See if anyone else has had dealings with Whitmore Industries that went sideways. If they've done this to us, they've done it to others. He was already dialing as Clara followed Margaret out of the office. The next 6 hours blurred together in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. Clara sat at a borrowed desk in a glass-walled conference room with 3 monitors and access to legal databases she hadn't touched in years. Margaret's team brought her coffee and files and occasionally asked questions that suggested they were starting to take her seriously. She read contracts until her eyes burned. Whitmore Industries had been busy. In the last 5 years, they'd negotiated deals with 11 different companies across 6 industries. Most of the contracts were confidential, but enough had been filed publicly, merger agreements, partnership disclosures, bankruptcy proceedings, that Clara could piece together patterns. And the patterns were damning. Every contract used slightly different language, but the structure was the same. Liquidation clauses buried in annexes, non-compete definitions that expanded like traps, dispute resolution that gave Whitmore control. It was like looking at the same blueprint drawn 11 different ways. "They're not even hiding it," Clara muttered. Richard looked up from his own research across the table. "What?" "The pattern. Once you know what to look for, it's obvious. They use the same structural approach in every deal, different words, same result." "How many have failed?" Clara pulled up her notes. "Of the 11 companies that signed contracts with Whitmore, 6 are now bankrupt, 3 were absorbed into Whitmore subsidiaries, and 2 are currently in litigation trying to break their agreements." "And we would have been number 12, Richard said quietly. "Yeah." He sat back in his chair looking like he'd aged 10 years in one morning. "How the hell did we miss this? How did everyone miss this?" "Because people trust the system," Clara said. "They assume contracts negotiated by expensive lawyers and vetted by legal teams are fundamentally fair. They don't expect to find fraud hiding in the fine print." "You expected it." Clara looked at him. Richard was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, part curiosity, part something else. "I learned not to trust things that look too good," she said finally. "Learned it the hard way." "What happened to you at Columbia?" The question landed like a punch. Clara turned back to her monitors. "That's not relevant." "It might be. Ethan said the Whitmores destroyed your career. I'm looking at evidence that they've destroyed 11 companies. I'm wondering if there's a connection." Clara's hand stilled on the keyboard. "Damian Whitmore was in my contract law seminar. We were both top of the class. He asked if I'd help him study for the final. I said yes. 2 weeks later, I was called before the academic board on charges of plagiarism." Richard waited. "He claimed I'd copied sections of his exam essay, had documentation showing I'd accessed his notes, collaborated on study materials, reviewed his practice answers. Made it look like I'd stolen his work instead of the other way around. By the time I proved he'd set me up, that he'd deliberately fed me material so he could accuse me later, I'd been suspended for a semester, lost my scholarship, reputation destroyed." "Why would he do that?" "Because I was better than him," Clara said simply. "Because he needed to be number 1, and I was in his way. Because the Whitmores don't like losing." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Did you sue?" "With what money? Against which lawyers?" "The Whitmores have an entire firm on retainer. I had a public defender who barely had time to return my calls." "So you just gave up?" The judgment in his voice made Clara's jaw tighten. "I survived. There's a difference." Before Richard could respond, Ethan walked into the conference room with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression that suggested he'd just heard something either very good or very bad. "Say that again," he said into the phone. Slowly, he listened. His face went carefully blank. "When?" Another pause. "Are you sure?" He hung up and looked at Clara and Richard like he was seeing them from very far away. "That was Jonathan Fisher," Ethan said, CEO of Fisher Technologies. "They signed a joint venture agreement with Whitmore Industries 18 months ago. Same structure as our contract. Liquidation clauses, arbitration control, the whole package. Whitmore triggered the buyout 6 months later, claimed Fisher violated the non-compete by launching a new product line, took the company apart and absorbed the assets. We knew they'd done this to others," Richard said. "Fisher's father died 3 weeks before the Whitmores triggered the liquidation," Ethan continued, his voice hollow. "Heart attack. Very sudden. Very convenient timing." The room went cold. "What are you saying?" Clara asked. Ethan met her eyes. "My father died 2 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. Unexpected. The company nearly fell apart. I was drowning, trying to hold things together while raising Sophie alone. And 6 months later, the Whitmores approached me about a partnership, said they wanted to help, said they knew what it was like to lose a parent and run a company at the same time." Clara felt something dark settle in her chest. "You think they killed your father?" "I think it's a hell of a coincidence," Ethan said. And I don't believe in coincidences. Neither do the Fishers, Richard said quietly. Jonathan mentioned they requested an autopsy review. Never got anywhere, no evidence of foul play, but the timing bothered them. How many of the failed companies lost leadership right before the Whitmores moved in? Clara asked. Richard and Ethan exchanged looks. I'll check, Richard said, already pulling up files. While he worked, Ethan sat down across from Clara. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of what he was carrying. But there was something else too, a kind of cold fury that made her understand why people called him dangerous. If they killed my father, he said quietly, I will destroy them. Not just stop the contract, destroy them. We don't know that but we're going to find out. Ethan leaned forward. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you ready for this? Really ready? Because if we keep digging, if we find proof that the Whitmores are behind multiple deaths and systematic corporate destruction, this becomes war. And they will come after you harder than they already have. Clara thought about Marcus Whitmore's threat, about Damien's smirk, about 3 years of hiding. She thought about Sophie, 5 years old, who deserved to inherit her grandfather's company without a knife in its back. I'm ready, she said. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Something that might have been respect flickered across Ethan's face. Okay, then here's what we're going to do. Richard is mapping the pattern of Whitmore deals. Margaret is pulling together a legal team to review everything. I want you to do something different. What? I want you to build me a case, Ethan said. A real case, the kind prosecutors can use. Find the connections, document the pattern, show how these contracts work as systematic fraud. Can you do that? Clara looked at the monitors in front of her, at the scattered files, at the evidence of 11 destroyed companies, looked at Richard's exhausted determination and Ethan's cold fury. Yeah, she said, I can do that. Good, Ethan stood, because in about 3 hours, the Whitmores are going to realize we're not showing up to sign, and when they do, they're going to come looking for answers. I want to be ready. He walked out, already on his phone again, leaving Clara and Richard alone with the evidence of corporate murder spread across their desks. Richard looked at her. You really quit your job for this? Seemed like the thing to do. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Clara said. She turned back to her monitors and kept reading, kept building, kept following the threads that connected dead fathers and broken companies and a family that had spent years hiding knives in contracts. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved through its Tuesday afternoon. Somewhere in the city, the Whitmores were waiting for a phone call that would never come. And in a glass-walled conference room on the 47th floor, a waitress who used to be a law student was building the case that would bring them down or destroy her trying. Either way, there was no going back now. The silence in her life had shattered, and Clara was done hiding in the pieces. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Clara was 3 levels deep in a bankruptcy filing from a company called Meridian Tech. No relation to the restaurant, just another coincidence in a case built on bodies, when Ethan's office door slammed open hard enough to rattle the glass walls. They know, he said. Richard looked up from his laptop. How bad? Marcus Whitmore just called my personal cell. Not the office line. My personal cell that maybe 10 people have. Ethan's voice was tight. Asked if I was feeling well, said he heard I might be coming down with something since I missed our appointment this morning. Threatening you already, Margaret said from her corner of the conference room. That was fast. It gets better. He said he hopes whatever's distracting me gets resolved quickly. Said it would be unfortunate if my personal problems affected my business judgment. Then he mentioned Sophie. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He said, what? Clara asked quietly. He said, that daughter of yours must be starting kindergarten soon. Exciting time. Important to make sure she has stability, security, a future to look forward to. Ethan's hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage. He threatened my daughter. That's not a direct threat, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. He could argue he was making conversation. He could argue a lot of things, Ethan cut her off. But we all know what he meant. And he made sure I knew that he knows where Sophie goes to school, what her schedule is, who picks her up. Clara felt sick. You need to increase her security. Already done. I called her school 20 minutes ago. She's not leaving the building without me or someone I personally authorize. I've got a car picking her up at 3 with a driver I trust. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. But that's not enough. As long as the Whitmores think I'm a threat, Sophie's a target. So we stop being a threat, Richard said. We back off. Tell them we're signing after all. And give them exactly what they want? Let them trap us the same way they trapped 11 other companies? Ethan shook his head. No, we're past that now. Then what do you want to do? Margaret asked. Because right now we have research and suspicions, but no proof. Nothing that would hold up in court. Nothing that would stop them from... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Clara stood abruptly. I need to make a call. To who? Ethan asked. Someone who might be able to help, if she'll talk to me. Clara walked back to the empty office she'd used that morning and closed the door, pulled out her phone, stared at a number she hadn't called in 3 years. Professor Elena Hernandez, Columbia Law. The only person who'd believed Clara when the plagiarism accusations came down. The only person who'd fought for her when everyone else was ready to throw her away. The phone rang 4 times before connecting. Clara Bennett. Professor Hernandez's voice was exactly as Clara remembered. Sharp, skeptical, missing nothing. I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you again. Professor, I know it's been a while. 3 years. You disappeared after the investigation cleared you. Stopped returning my calls. Dropped out of law school despite having a clean record and a scholarship waiting. The accusation in her voice made Clara's throat tight. I couldn't stay, not after what happened. Because Damian Whitmore destroyed your reputation, even though the board exonerated you. Yes, I remember. What I don't understand is why you let him win. I didn't let him. You let him chase you out of law school, out of the profession, out of the future you'd worked for. I'd call that letting him win. Clara closed her eyes. I didn't call to defend myself. Then why did you call? Because I need your help, and because you were right about the Whitmores. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Professor Hernandez asked, her voice suddenly careful. You told me once that Damian's family made their money by breaking things, that they were good at finding legal ways to do illegal things, that the plagiarism accusation was probably practice for something bigger. Clara opened her eyes. You were right. They've been doing it to corporations for years. Systematic fraud hidden in contract language. I'm looking at 11 companies they've destroyed using the same playbook. And you're calling me because I need someone who understands how predatory contracts work. Someone who can help me build a case that prosecutors will actually take seriously. Someone the Whitmores can't intimidate or buy off. Professor Hernandez was quiet for a moment. Then, where are you? Vale Industries, Midtown, working with Ethan Vale. He was about to sign one of their contracts until I caught the traps. The waitress who answered a phone and saved a billionaire. Yes, I saw the business news this morning. They're speculating about why Vale postponed the Whitmore signing. A pause. They don't know you're involved, do they? Not yet. They will. The Whitmores don't like loose ends. And Clara, you're the loosest end they've ever had. You're the one person who can connect Damian's pattern of academic fraud to his family's pattern of corporate fraud. If they figure out you're helping Vale, they already know. Marcus Whitmore called me last night, told me to back off. And you're still there. Yes. Professor Hernandez laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're either very brave or you've finally stopped caring whether you survive. Which is it? Clara thought about that. About the last 3 years of invisible waitressing. About the way she'd felt reading contracts this morning, alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. I'm tired of hiding, she said finally. Good. Send me everything you have, every contract, every connection, every piece of evidence. I'll start building a framework for prosecution, but Clara, you need to understand something. If we're going after the Whitmores, we're going after one of the most powerful families in New York. They have resources, connections, lawyers who make Margaret's team look like public defenders. They will fight dirty. They will come after everyone involved, and they don't lose. They lost to you, Clara said. When you proved Damian set me up. I proved academic misconduct. That's not the same as proving systematic corporate fraud and possibly murder. Those are different courts, different stakes, different rules. But you'll help. Another pause. Longer this time. Send me the files, Professor Hernandez said. I'll look at what you have. No promises beyond that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might end up wishing you'd stayed a waitress. The line went dead. Clara stood there for a moment, holding her phone, feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion. Then she walked back to the conference room where Ethan and Richard and Margaret were huddled over a laptop screen, showing something that made them all look sick. What? Clara asked. Richard turned the laptop toward her. James Vale's autopsy report. Ethan's father. I pulled it from the medical examiner's database. How did you... Never mind. Clara leaned in to read. What am I looking at? Cause of death, acute myocardial infarction, heart attack, very sudden, very severe. Toxicology came back clean, no signs of foul play. Richard pointed to a section near the bottom. But look at this. The ME noted unusual potassium levels. Higher than expected, but not high enough to be flagged as suspicious. Potassium can cause heart attacks if administered in high doses, Margaret said quietly. It's also incredibly hard to detect if done carefully. Metabolizes quickly, mimics natural heart failure. Clara felt her stomach turn. You think they injected him with potassium? I think it's possible, Ethan said. His voice was flat, emotionless, the kind of calm that came before violence. And I think if we pulled the autopsy reports for the other company leaders who died before Whitmore takeovers, we might find similar anomalies. That's not proof, Margaret warned. Elevated potassium could be natural, could be diet, stress, pre-existing conditions. No prosecutor would bring murder charges based on ambiguous lab values. But it's a pattern, Clara said, just like the contracts. Individually, each piece looks innocent. Together, they tell a story. A story isn't evidence. No, but it's a direction. Clara pulled out her phone. I just talked to my former professor at Columbia, Elena Hernandez. She specializes in corporate fraud prosecution. She wants to see everything we have. Ethan looked at her sharply. You trust her? She's the only person who stood by me when Damian Whitmore tried to destroy my career. Yes, I trust her. Can she build a case? If anyone can, she can. But she said it won't be easy. The Whitmores have resources, connections. I don't care what they have, Ethan interrupted. If they killed my father, if they've been killing people and destroying companies for years, I want them in prison. Whatever it takes. The absoluteness in his voice made Clara uneasy. She recognized that tone, the sound of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences, who'd decided the end justified any means. Ethan, she said carefully, we have to do this legally. If we step outside the law, they've been stepping outside the law for years and nobody's stopped them. Because nobody's had enough evidence, we're changing that. But if we break the rules to bring them down, we become them. Ethan stared at her. For a moment, Clara thought he might argue, might push back, might remind her that she had no right to lecture a billionaire CEO about ethics. Instead, he said, You're right. I'm sorry. When he mentioned Sophie, I know. Okay. Clara kept her voice gentle. But we protect Sophie by building an unbreakable case, not by giving the Whitmores ammunition to paint us as the villains. Richard cleared his throat. Speaking of Sophie, you should probably pick her up yourself today. Show the Whitmores you're not intimidated. I'm terrified, Ethan said flatly. But yes, I'll pick her up, and I'll keep her home from school tomorrow until we have better security in place. She'll hate that, Margaret said. She'll survive. Ethan checked his watch. It's almost 1. I need to brief the board, explain why we killed the Whitmore deal, and prepare for whatever shitstorm is coming. Richard, keep pulling autopsy reports. Margaret, work with Clara to organize everything for Professor Hernandez. I want a complete case file by end of day. He started toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Clara. Thank you, he said, for not walking away when you could have. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with Richard and Margaret and the evidence of multiple deaths spread across their screens. He's going to do something stupid, Richard said quietly. Probably, Margaret agreed. Men like Ethan don't handle threats to their children well, especially single fathers who've already lost one parent. Clara thought about Sophie, 5 years old, about to be picked up from school by a father who was barely holding his rage together. Thought about Marcus Whitmore's smooth threat. Thought about Damien's smirk. "We need to move faster," she said. "How long to pull all the autopsy reports?" "If they're all in the database, a few hours." Richard was already typing. "But some might be sealed, some might be in different jurisdictions. Could take days." "We don't have days. The Whitmores know we're on to them. They'll start covering tracks, destroying evidence, preparing counterattacks." Clara pulled up the list of failed companies. "What if we focus on the most recent ones first? The deaths that happened in the last 2 years. Less time for evidence to degrade, better chance of finding witnesses who remember details." "That's 3 companies," Margaret said, scanning the list. Fisher Technologies, Meridian Tech, and Howell Construction. All 3 lost their CEOs within 6 months of signing Whitmore deals. All 3 subsequently collapsed or got absorbed. "Start there," Clara said. "Pull medical records, talk to family members, find out if anyone noticed anything suspicious at the time." "That's going to raise flags," Richard warned. "Start calling bereaved families, asking questions about their dead relatives. The Whitmores will hear about it." "Good. Let them hear. Let them know we're not backing down." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's a risky strategy." "We're already at risk," Clara said. "Marcus threatened a 5-year-old. They're not playing by civilized rules. Why should we?" "Because we're trying to be better than them," Margaret said. "Remember? That was your speech 10 minutes ago." Clara felt her face flush. "You're right. I'm sorry. I just want them to pay for what they did to you," Richard finished. "Yeah, we get it. But Margaret's right. We stay clean, stay legal, stay focused. Build the case brick by brick." Clara nodded, swallowing the frustration that wanted to explode into something reckless. They were right. She knew they were right. But knowing didn't make it easier. For the next 4 hours, Clara lost herself in documents, medical records, incorporation filings, merger agreements. Each new piece of evidence adding weight to the pattern, building a picture of systematic corporate murder that made her hands shake and her stomach turn. Fisher Technologies, CEO. Jonathan Fisher's father died of a heart attack 3 weeks before the Whitmore liquidation. Potassium levels elevated but not flagged. Meridian Tech, CEO. Sarah Chen's mother died in a car accident 2 months before the company collapsed. Brake failure ruled mechanical error, no investigation. Howell Construction, CEO. Michael Howell died himself. Heart attack at 46, no prior history of cardiac issues. Potassium levels elevated. Company absorbed by Whitmore subsidiary within weeks. 3 deaths. 3 companies. 3 families destroyed. "They're killing people," Clara said to the empty conference room. "They're actually killing people." "Yes." Professor Hernandez's voice came through Clara's laptop speakers. They'd set up a video call an hour ago, and the professor had been reviewing documents in silence since. Now she looked at Clara through the screen with an expression that mixed fury and professional calculation. "The question is whether we can prove it in a way that holds up in court. Elevated potassium in multiple victims. That's not coincidence. It's not proof either. Potassium levels fluctuate naturally. Defense lawyers will bring in experts who will testify about diet, stress, pre-existing conditions. They'll create reasonable doubt." "So we're back to nothing," Clara said bitterly. "We're back to needing more. We need to connect the Whitmores directly to these deaths. Find the how, the injection sites, the purchase records, the people who administered the poison. Find the why documented somewhere. Emails, recordings, witnesses. That could take months, years. Or it could take one person deciding to talk." Professor Hernandez leaned closer to her camera. "The Whitmores didn't do this alone. Someone administered those injections. Someone disposed of evidence. Someone helped plan the timing. Find that someone. And convince them to betray one of the most powerful families in New York. Sure. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. But Clara, you need to understand something. If you're going to take down the Whitmores, you can't do it halfway. You can't wound them and walk away. You hit them once, you better make sure they don't get back up. Because otherwise, they'll come after everyone who helped." "Exactly. Which means everyone in that building with you right now is at risk. Ethan Vale, his daughter, Richard, Margaret, everyone on the legal team, and you especially." Clara thought about that. About Sophie in kindergarten. About Ethan's exhausted rage. About Richard and Margaret, who'd spent the day helping a stranger build a case against one of their client's business partners. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. "Stop putting other people in danger." "Too late for that. You answered the phone. You found the clause. The Whitmores already see you as a threat. Leaving won't make you safe. It'll just make you alone and unprotected. So what do I do?" "You finish what you started. You find the person who helped them kill. You build an unbreakable case. And you pray that justice moves faster than their assassins." The casual way Professor Hernandez said assassins made Clara's blood run cold. "You really think they'd kill me?" "I think they've killed at least 3 people we know about, possibly more. I think you're the biggest threat to their entire operation, and I think the Whitmores don't leave threats alive." Professor Hernandez's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're walking into." "I understand." "Do you? Because 3 years ago you ran from a plagiarism accusation. Now you're going after people who commit murder. That's not the same fight." Clara felt the sting of that assessment, but it was fair. 3 years ago, I was alone," she said finally. "I had no resources, no allies, no power. Now I have a billionaire CEO backing me, a legal team helping me, and you building the prosecution framework. I'm not alone this time." "Neither are they, and they have more money, more connections, more experience fighting dirty. But we have something they don't." "What's that?" "We're actually trying to do the right thing," Clara said. "That has to count for something." Professor Hernandez looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, small and sad. "You haven't changed as much as you think. Still naive enough to believe justice matters." "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation. Hold on to that belief, Clara. You're going to need it when things get dark." The screen went black as Professor Hernandez ended the call. Clara sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by evidence of murder and fraud, watching the sun set over Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows that suddenly felt less like architectural features and more like exposure. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan, Sophie's home safe, security in place. How's the case file coming?" Clara looked at the organized folders on her laptop. Contracts, medical records, financial filings, autopsy reports, all cross-referenced and annotated and ready for prosecution. She typed back, "Ready to send to Hernandez. But Ethan, we need to talk about protection for everyone involved." 3 dots appeared, then, "Come to my office." Clara found him standing at his windows, silhouette dark against the dying light. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sophie asked me why there are security guards following us," he said quietly. "Asked if we did something wrong. She's 5 years old and she's asking if her father is a criminal." "What did you tell her?" "That sometimes people get angry when you stand up for what's right. That the guards are just being careful." He finally turned to face Clara. "She asked if the angry people are going to hurt me." Clara's chest tightened. "What did you say?" "I lied. Told her everything would be fine. Told her not to worry. Told her all the things parents tell their children when the world is dangerous and we're pretending it's not." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "My father used to tell me the same things, right up until his heart stopped and I had to figure out how to run his company while my daughter was still in diapers." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Help me make sure whoever killed him pays for it." Clara moved closer. "Professor Hernandez says we need direct evidence. Someone who was involved in the murders willing to testify. Medical records alone won't be enough." "So we find that person." "How?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, "The Whitmores use a private medical practice. Whitmore Family Health Services. Very exclusive, very discreet. My father was a patient there, that's how I know about it. They handle everything for wealthy families. Regular checkups, executive physicals, house calls." Understanding dawned cold in Clara's stomach. "House calls? They'd have access to patients in their homes, privacy, no witnesses, and complete medical records showing what they're supposed to do versus what they actually did. Getting access to those records would require a warrant, which requires probable cause, which we don't have yet." "No, but we have something else." Ethan pulled out his phone and showed Clara a text message. "This came in 20 minutes ago. Anonymous number, no way to trace it." Then Clara read the message. If you want to know what really happened to your father, look at Dr. Patricia Chen's patient logs from 2 years ago, specifically the house call the day before he died. It's a trap, Clara said immediately. Probably, but what if it's not? What if someone inside the Whitmore operation is ready to break? Then they'd come forward directly, not send cryptic texts. Unless they're scared, unless they're testing to see if we're serious before they risk everything. Clara looked at the message again. Something about it felt wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what. We should tell Professor Hernandez, she said. Get her advice before we do anything. Already sent it to her. She said the same thing you did. Probably a trap. But she also said if there's even a chance someone's trying to help us, we should pursue it carefully. How carefully? Carefully enough that we don't walk into an ambush. Carefully enough that we document everything. Carefully enough that if this is real, we can protect the source. Ethan met her eyes. I want you to come with me tomorrow. We're going to Whitmore Family Health Services. We're going to request my father's complete medical records, and we're going to see if Dr. Patricia Chen will talk to us. She won't. If she's involved, she'll deny everything. If she's not involved, she'll have no idea what we're talking about. Then we'll know it was a trap. But Clara, I have to try. If there's any chance at all, that I can prove what they did to my father, I have to take it. Clara understood. Understood the desperation of wanting answers, wanting justice, wanting the people who'd destroyed your life to finally face consequences. She'd felt the same way 3 years ago. Okay, she said, but we bring security, and we tell Richard and Margaret where we're going, and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Agreed. They stood there in the darkening office, two people who'd been strangers 48 hours ago, now bound together by corporate murder and shared danger, and the kind of trust that formed when you had no other choice. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Sure. Why are you really doing this? Not the surface reason about justice or stopping the Whitmores, the real reason. Clara thought about that, about Damien's smirk and 3 years of hiding, and the moment she'd answered Ethan's phone and felt herself wake up. Because I'm tired of being the person things happen to, she said finally. For 3 years I've been invisible, safe, small, and I've been miserable. Maybe I'll die trying to take down the Whitmores, but at least I'll die as myself. Ethan nodded slowly. My father used to say the same thing, that he'd rather fail as himself than succeed as someone else's puppet. Sounds like a good man. He was, which is why I'm going to prove they murdered him, whatever it takes. The absoluteness in his voice worried Clara, but she didn't argue, didn't warn him again about staying legal and ethical, didn't remind him that revenge and justice weren't the same thing, because she understood, and because part of her, the part that still dreamed about making Damien Whitmore pay, agreed with him. They were walking into darkness together, and neither of them was sure they'd come out the other side. The morning came too fast and brought no answers with it. Clara stood outside Whitmore Family Health Services at 8:30 a.m. with Ethan beside her and two security guards trailing at a careful distance. The building was older than she'd expected, brownstone instead of glass and steel, tucked into a quiet street in the Upper East Side where money whispered instead of shouted. A brass plate beside the door read the practice name in elegant script that probably cost more than Clara used to make in a month. You ready? Ethan asked. Clara wasn't. Her hands were shaking and her stomach felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. But she nodded anyway, because turning back now would mean admitting she was too scared to see this through. Ethan pushed open the door. Inside was all dark wood and leather chairs, and the smell of old money trying to pretend it cared about health. A receptionist who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine glanced up from her computer with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Do you have an appointment? No, Ethan said, but I need to speak with Dr. Patricia Chen. It's about my father's medical records. The receptionist's smile dimmed slightly. Dr. Chen doesn't take walk-ins. If you'd like to schedule, my name is Ethan Vale. My father was James Vale. He was a patient here until he died 2 years ago, and I need access to his complete medical history. Something flickered across the receptionist's face. Recognition, maybe. Or alarm. I'll see if Dr. Chen is available, she said carefully. Please wait here. She disappeared through a door behind her desk, leaving Clara and Ethan standing in a waiting room that felt more like a museum than a medical office. Abstract art on the walls. Coffee table books about wellness and longevity. Not a single other patient visible anywhere. This place gives me the creeps, Clara muttered. It's supposed to. Exclusive means intimidating, makes rich people feel special. Ethan was scanning the room with the careful attention of someone looking for exits and cameras and anything that might be a threat. The receptionist returned 5 minutes later. Dr. Chen can see you briefly. Please follow me. They were led down a hallway lined with closed doors, each marked with names Clara didn't recognize. At the end of the hall was an office that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd read too many articles about minimalist luxury. White walls, chrome furniture, a desk so clean it might never have been used. Dr. Patricia Chen sat behind that desk wearing a white coat over designer clothes and an expression that gave nothing away. She was maybe 50, Asian, with careful makeup and the kind of calm that came from years of dealing with difficult wealthy patients. Mr. Vale, she said without standing, I'm very sorry for your loss. Your father was a valued patient. Was he? Ethan's voice was flat. Because I'm looking at his medical records and I'm seeing some things that don't make sense. Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. What kind of things? Like the house call you made the day before he died. The one that's not listed in his file with the insurance company. The one that only shows up in your private logs. Now Clara saw it. A tiny tightening around Dr. Chen's eyes. Just for a second. Then it was gone. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Dr. Chen said smoothly. All house calls are properly documented and billed. Are they? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the anonymous text. Someone seems to think otherwise. Doctor. Chen glanced at the screen, and this time she couldn't quite hide her reaction. Her face went carefully blank in the way people's faces did when they were working very hard not to show fear. I don't know who sent you that message, she said quietly, but I can assure you that your father received excellent care up until his unfortunate passing. Unfortunate, Ethan repeated. Interesting word choice, not tragic, not unexpected. Unfortunate. Mr. Vale, if you're implying, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. My father had a house call from this practice the day before he died. His potassium levels at autopsy were elevated beyond normal range, and 3 other CEOs who were patients here died under similar circumstances right before their companies were acquired by Whitmore Industries. The silence that followed was so complete Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Dr. Chen stood slowly. I think you should leave. I'm not leaving until you tell me what happened to my father. Your father had a heart attack. A tragic natural heart attack. The autopsy confirmed it. There's nothing more to discuss. The autopsy confirmed cardiac arrest, Ethan corrected. It didn't confirm cause. An elevated potassium can cause cardiac arrest if administered in sufficient doses. Are you accusing me of murdering your father? Dr. Chen's voice was very quiet now, very dangerous. I'm asking questions. There's a difference. Dr. Chen walked to her office door and opened it. I've answered all the questions I'm going to answer. If you continue to harass me or make unfounded accusations, I'll contact the police and my attorneys. Please leave. Ethan didn't move. Someone in this practice knows what really happened. Someone sent me that text because they can't live with what they've done. If that's you, Dr. Chen, this is your chance to do the right thing. For just a moment, Clara saw something in Dr. Chen's face that might have been guilt or fear or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by professional ice. Get out, Dr. Chen said. Now. Ethan looked at Clara. She nodded slightly. They'd pushed as far as they could. Any further, and they'd cross into territory that could be used against them later. They walked back down the hallway in silence, past the receptionist who was very deliberately not looking at them, out into morning sunlight that felt too bright after the darkness of that office. She knows, Ethan said once they were back on the street. Did you see her face when I showed her the text? I saw someone who's terrified, Clara said. Question is whether she's terrified of us, or of whoever sent that message, or of the Whitmores themselves. All 3, probably. Ethan pulled out his phone. I'm calling Richard. We need to document this conversation while it's fresh. And we need to figure out who sent that text and why. He walked a few steps away, already talking rapidly to Richard. Clara stood on the sidewalk feeling the weight of what they'd just done settle over her. They'd confronted a doctor in her own office, accused her of murder, and walked away with nothing but confirmation that someone in that building was hiding something. Not exactly a victory. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about the anonymous text to Ethan and decided she couldn't afford to ignore anything. Hello? Clara Bennett? The voice was female, older, shaking slightly. You were just at Whitmore Family Health Services. Clara's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who made a terrible mistake and doesn't know how to fix it. A pause. Dr. Chen isn't the one you want. She follows orders. You need to look higher. Higher where? Marcus Whitmore personally approves all high-value house calls, signs off on medications, reviews outcomes. If something happened to James Vale, Marcus knew about it, planned it, paid for it. Clara was frantically gesturing at Ethan, mouthing, "Record this." He pulled out his phone and started capturing the audio. How do you know this? Clara asked. Because I'm the office manager. I process the billing. I see what gets documented and what doesn't. I've been seeing it for 3 years, and I kept my mouth shut because I was scared. But I can't anymore. I can't keep watching them kill people. Are you the one who sent the text to Ethan Vale? Yes, I thought if he knew where to look, if he asked the right questions, maybe it would be enough. But Dr. Chen won't talk. She's too afraid. They own her. Who owns her? The Whitmores. They have something on her. I don't know what. But she does exactly what Marcus tells her and never asks questions. Clara's mind was racing. We need you to testify. We need you to tell prosecutors what you just told me. I can't. They'll kill me. You don't understand what they're capable of. I understand perfectly. They destroyed my life 3 years ago for getting in their way. But we can protect you. No one can protect me from the Whitmores. You're naive if you think otherwise. The woman's voice cracked. I'm calling because I can't live with this anymore. Because every time I process another house call billing, I wonder if I'm helping them kill someone else. But I can't be your witness. I have a family. I have children. Then give us something we can use. Documents, recordings, proof that connects Marcus Whitmore to these deaths. Everything's electronic. Everything's encrypted. And I don't have access to the medical files, only the billing records. Billing records can be enough. They show patterns, frequencies, who authorized what. They'll know it came from me. I'm the only one who sees those records besides Dr. Chen and Marcus. Clara closed her eyes, thinking fast. What if we got a warrant? What if prosecutors subpoenaed the records so it doesn't look like you leaked anything? You can't get a warrant without probable cause. And you can't establish probable cause without evidence. You're stuck in a loop. Then help us break the loop. Give us one piece of evidence, just one, that we can use to justify a warrant. The silence on the other end lasted so long Clara thought the woman had hung up. Then, James Vale's house called the day before he died. The billing code used was for a standard executive wellness check, but the actual service provided was listed internally as cardiac intervention. That's not wellness. That's treatment for an active heart condition. Clara's hand tightened on her phone. But James Vale didn't have a heart condition. Exactly. So why would we bill for cardiac intervention? Unless the intervention itself caused the cardiac event. Can you send us a copy of that billing record? I can't send you anything without leaving a digital trail, but if you file a formal medical records request through the estate, it'll have to include all billing documentation. They can't hide it without committing fraud. And if we file that request, they'll know we're looking. They already know. You just walked into Dr. Chen's office and accused her of murder. You think that's not going to get back to Marcus within the hour? The woman was right. Clara felt stupid for not thinking it through. Is there anything else you can tell us? Clara asked. Any other deaths you remember? Any patterns? 3 in the last 2 years, James Vale, Michael Howell, Thomas Fisher. All cardiac events following house calls coded as wellness checks, but documented internally as interventions. The woman's voice dropped to barely a whisper. And there's one more scheduled for next week, a CEO named David Morrison. His company's been in acquisition talks with Whitmore Industries for 6 months. Same pattern, same setup. Clara felt sick. They're going to kill him. Unless someone stops them. Which is why I'm calling you. But I can't do more than this. I can't testify. I can't give you documents. I can't put myself in their crosshairs. We need your name. If we're going to file records requests, if we're going to build a case, Sarah Kim. But if you ever tell anyone I called you, I'll deny it. I'll say you're lying. I'll destroy any credibility you have. Understood. Thank you for... The line went dead. Clara stood there holding her phone, feeling like she'd just been handed a live grenade. She looked at Ethan, who'd stopped his own call, and was staring at her with an expression that suggested he'd heard enough to understand this was either very good or very bad. Tell me, he said. Clara told him. About Sarah Kim. About the billing codes. About the internal documentation of cardiac interventions for patients who didn't have heart conditions. About David Morrison. When she finished, Ethan was very quiet. They're going to kill someone else, he said finally. Next week. And we can't stop them because we have no legal standing, no warrant, nothing but a phone call from someone who won't testify. We could warn him. Morrison. Tell him not to accept any house calls from Whitmore Family Health Services. And he'll think we're insane, or he'll tell the Whitmores, or he'll be too proud to believe he's in danger. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. We need hard evidence, now, before they kill someone else. The billing record, Sarah mentioned, if we file the estate request. It'll take weeks, maybe months. Morrison doesn't have months. Clara thought about that. About a man walking around New York right now with no idea he was marked for death. About Marcus Whitmore, somewhere planning the timing, reviewing the medications, signing off on murder like it was a business expense. What if we went directly to Morrison, she asked. Showed him what we found. Convinced him to refuse the house call and go public with what we know? He'd need to see proof. We don't have proof. We have suspicions and patterns and a phone call from someone who won't go on record. We have the contracts. We have the autopsy reports showing elevated potassium. We have Sarah's information about the billing codes. That's more than nothing. Ethan considered this. It might be enough to scare him into taking us seriously. But Clara, if we approach Morrison and he decides we're crazy, he could warn the Whitmores, could tell them we're building a case, could accelerate their timeline. Or he could be the break we need, the witness who's still alive, the CEO who refuses to be the next victim. They stood there on the sidewalk outside Whitmore Family Health Services, watching well-dressed people walk past on their way to appointments that probably wouldn't kill them, trying to decide whether saving a stranger's life was worth the risk of destroying their case. I'm calling Professor Hernandez, Ethan said finally. We need legal advice before we do anything. The call lasted 15 minutes. Clara could only hear Ethan's side, but she could fill in the rest from his expressions. Skepticism, frustration, reluctant agreement. When he hung up, he looked like he'd aged another 10 years. She says approaching Morrison is legally risky, but morally necessary. Says if we have credible evidence someone's in danger, we have an obligation to warn them. But she wants us to document everything, record the conversation, get Morrison's response in writing if possible, and be prepared for this to blow up in our faces. When do we go? Clara asked. Now, before I talk myself out of it. David Morrison worked in a tower in the financial district that made Vail Industries look modest. They had to get past 3 different layers of security before reaching an assistant who looked at them like they were door-to-door salesmen. Mr. Morrison doesn't take unscheduled meetings, she said. Tell him it's about his upcoming medical appointment, Ethan said. Tell him Ethan Vail needs 5 minutes to discuss a matter of life and death. The assistant's expression suggested she heard dramatic claims like that daily, but she made a call, spoke quietly, listened, then hung up and looked at them with new wariness. Mr. Morrison will give you 10 minutes. Conference room 3. David Morrison was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that came from building empires and surviving hostile takeovers. He walked into the conference room exactly on time and sat down with the posture of a man who was already bored. Ethan Vail, he said, I know your company. Good work on the infrastructure expansions last year. What's this about my medical appointment? Ethan didn't waste time. Do you have a house call scheduled with Whitmore Family Health Services in the next 2 weeks? Morrison's expression shifted slightly. That's private medical information. Why would you? Because the last 3 CEOs who had house calls from that practice died within 48 hours, and I think my father was one of them. The conference room went very quiet. Morrison sat back in his chair. That's a serious accusation. It's a pattern, Clara said. She pulled out her laptop and turned it so Morrison could see the screen. These are the autopsy reports. These are the billing records we've obtained so far. These are the contracts all three companies signed with Whitmore Industries right before their leaders died. You're in acquisition talks with the Whitmores right now. Same pattern, same setup. Morrison looked at the screen for a long time. His face gave nothing away, but Clara saw his jaw tighten. You're saying the Whitmores are murdering their business partners, he said slowly. We're saying there's a pattern of deaths that looks too consistent to be coincidence, Ethan said. And we're saying if you have a house call scheduled, you should cancel it immediately and go public with what we're telling you. Go public with speculation and paranoia? Destroy my acquisition deal based on conspiracy theories from a CEO whose own deal fell through? Morrison shook his head. You realize how this sounds? I realize exactly how it sounds, Ethan said. I also realize my father died 2 days after a house call from the same practice you use. Died suddenly. Died young. Died with potassium levels that suggested intervention rather than natural causes. Potassium fluctuates. Not this much. Not this consistently across multiple victims. Not when there's financial motive tied to every death. Morrison stood. I appreciate the warning, but I'm not canceling medical appointments or destroying business relationships based on coincidence and elevated lab values. If you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, take it to the police. Otherwise, stop wasting my time. Mr. Morrison, Clara started. We're done here. Morrison walked to the door, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your father, Ethan. Losing a parent young is hard, but grief can make us see patterns that aren't there. I hope you find peace. He left. Clara and Ethan sat in the conference room staring at the closed door. He's not going to listen, Clara said quietly. No, he's going to have his house call. He's going to die. And we're going to have known it was coming and been unable to stop it. We tried. Not hard enough. Ethan grabbed his phone. I'm calling the police, filing a report, getting this on record. They won't do anything. Morrison said it himself. We have speculation, not evidence. Then we get evidence. We break into that medical practice. We steal the files ourselves. We do whatever it takes. Ethan, no. Clara grabbed his arm. That's illegal. That would destroy any case we could build. That would let the Whitmores paint us as criminals and use it to discredit everything we found. So we just watch Morrison die? We document everything. We build the case. And when Morrison dies, if he dies, we use it as proof. We show the pattern one more time. We force prosecutors to pay attention. Ethan yanked his arm away. You want me to let someone die so we can use their corpse as evidence? I want you to not destroy our entire case by committing crimes that the Whitmores can use against us. I want you to be smarter than they expect. I want you to win, Ethan, not just fight. He stared at her. You sound like my father. He was always talking about winning the long game, playing chess while everyone else played checkers. And look where it got him, dead at 58 with potassium in his veins. Your father didn't know what he was fighting. We do. That's the difference. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat back down, hard, like all the fight had drained out of him. I hate this, he said quietly. I hate knowing what's coming and being powerless to stop it. We're not powerless. We're just not powerful enough yet. But we're building that power. Every contract we analyze, every connection we find, every piece of evidence we gather, we're building the case that's going to destroy them. And if Morrison dies while we're building it, then we make sure he's the last one. We use his death to force the investigation they've been avoiding. We turn his tragedy into their downfall. Clara hated how cold that sounded, hated the calculation in her own voice. But she'd learned 3 years ago that fighting powerful people required becoming someone harder than the person you used to be. They left Morrison's building and headed back to Vail Industries in silence. The security guards followed at their careful distance. The city moved around them with its usual indifference. And somewhere across town, Marcus Whitmore was probably getting reports about their visit to Dr. Chen, their call to Morrison, their increasingly desperate attempts to expose what they couldn't yet prove. Clara's phone rang. Professor Hernandez. I heard about Morrison, she said without preamble. Richard filled me in. You did the right thing warning him even if he didn't listen. Doesn't feel right, Clara said. It never does. But Clara, I've been making calls, reaching out to contacts at the DA's office. the FBI's white-collar crime division, anyone who might have jurisdiction over this kind of systematic fraud. And I'm getting pushback. What kind of pushback? The Whitmores have friends in every agency that matters. They've donated to every campaign, funded every charity, built relationships with every prosecutor who could possibly investigate them. No one wants to take this case. No one wants to go after a family that powerful without absolutely bulletproof evidence. We're gathering evidence, I know, but it might not be enough. Claire, you need to prepare for the possibility that even with everything you're finding, this doesn't lead to prosecution, that the system protects them because the system was built by people like them. Clara felt something hard and cold settle in her chest. Then what was the point? Why are we doing this if it doesn't matter? It matters, Professor Hernandez said firmly. Even if prosecutors won't act, we can still expose them. Public pressure, media coverage, shareholder lawsuits. There are ways to destroy powerful people that don't require criminal conviction. That's not justice. No, but it might be the best we can get. And Clara, be careful. The closer you get to proving what they've done, the more dangerous you become to them. Watch your back. The call ended. Clara relayed the conversation to Ethan as they rode the elevator back up to his office. By the time they reached the 47th floor, his expression had gone from exhausted to something darker. If the system won't give us justice, he said, we'll get it ourselves. What does that mean? It means I have resources they don't expect, connections they don't know about, ways to hurt them that don't require prosecutors or courts or playing by rules they've already rigged. Ethan, I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about money, leverage, pressure. I can't put them in prison, but I can destroy their business, burn their reputation, make them toxic to every partner and investor they have. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that revenge and justice were different, that becoming the thing you fought made you just as bad. But she was tired and scared and starting to think that Professor Hernandez was right, that the system was never going to hold the Whitmores accountable because the system was designed to protect people exactly like them. What do you need from me? She asked instead. Ethan looked at her with something that might have been gratitude or relief or shared understanding that they'd both crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Keep building the case, he said. Keep documenting everything, because even if prosecutors won't use it, the public will. And when we're ready, when we have enough to bury them in the court of opinion, we're going to burn the Whitmore empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing grows back. Clara nodded. They spent the rest of the day working in grim silence, each lost in their own thoughts about justice and revenge, and the thin line between fighting monsters and becoming one. And somewhere across the city, David Morrison was scheduling his house call, trusting the system that had never failed him, walking toward a death that Clara and Ethan could see coming but couldn't stop. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy in the room. Heavier still was the certainty that when Morrison died, and he would die, there would be no going back. No more playing by rules, no more trusting the system. Just war. Cold and calculated and final. Clara looked at the evidence spread across her desk and wondered if she'd recognize herself when this was over. Wondered if the person who'd answered a phone 2 days ago would recognize the person she was becoming. Wondered if it mattered. The sun set outside the windows, and the city lit up with a million points of light, each one hiding its own darkness. Clara kept working. There was nothing else to do. David Morrison died on a Thursday. The news broke at 6 a.m. while Clara was staring at her coffee maker and trying to convince herself that sleep deprivation was just another form of discipline. Her phone lit up with the alert, local business news, the kind of sanitized reporting that turned tragedy into transaction. Prominent CEO found dead in his home. Apparent heart attack. Survived by wife and 3 children. Whitmore Industries released a statement expressing profound sorrow. Clara's hand started shaking so badly she had to set down her mug before she dropped it. She called Ethan. He answered on the first ring, voice raw like he'd been awake for days. "You saw," he said. Not a question. "Yeah." "We could have stopped this." "No, we couldn't. He wouldn't listen. The system wouldn't help. We did everything." "It wasn't enough." Ethan's voice cracked. "We warned him. We gave him evidence. And he's still dead because we weren't convincing enough, weren't fast enough, weren't—" "Stop." Clara surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Morrison made his choice. He chose to trust the wrong people. That's on him, not us. That's cold. That's survival. If we fall apart every time the Whitmores win, we'll never make it to the end of this. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm going to his house. I need to see what happened. Ethan, that's a crime scene. You can't just watch me. He hung up. Clara stood in her tiny kitchen, feeling the last threads of control slipping through her fingers. She should call him back, talk him down, remind him that grief made people stupid, and stupid got people killed. Instead, she got dressed, grabbed her laptop, and headed for Morrison's address in Greenwich Village that she'd looked up 3 days ago and memorized without meaning to. She arrived to find news vans already circling like vultures and police tape blocking the brownstone entrance. Ethan's car was parked illegally across the street, and Ethan himself stood on the sidewalk arguing with a uniformed officer who looked about 2 seconds from calling backup. Just need 5 minutes to pay my respects. Sir, this is an active investigation. Family only. Please step back. Clara walked up before Ethan could do something that got him arrested. Officer, I'm sorry. My friend just lost someone very close to him. We'll wait across the street. She grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him away before he could argue. The officer watched them go with obvious relief. What are you doing here? Ethan asked once they were out of earshot. Stopping you from getting yourself arrested for obstruction. What were you planning to do exactly? Break into a crime scene and contaminate evidence? I was planning to see if they did the same thing to him they did to my father. Check for injection sites. Look for potassium chloride bottles. Find something they missed. The police have already processed the scene. Whatever evidence exists, they either found it or it's gone. Unless the Whitmores own the cops processing the scene. Unless this gets ruled natural causes just like all the others. Unless, Ethan, Clara made him look at her. I know you're angry. I'm angry too. But we can't help Morrison now. What we can do is make sure the pattern is undeniable. Make sure when we finally expose this, his death means something. Ethan stared at the brownstone like he could see through the walls to whatever horror was inside. They killed him, right on schedule, exactly like we said they would, and nobody cares. We care, that's enough to start with. A black town car pulled up to the police tape, and Clara's stomach dropped when she recognized the man who stepped out. Marcus Whitmore himself, silver-haired and immaculate in a charcoal suit, moving toward the police line with the confidence of someone who owned everything, including the crime scene. What the hell is he doing here? Ethan's voice was pure venom. Clara watched Marcus speak to one of the officers, watched them nod and step aside, watched him walk through the police tape like it was a suggestion rather than a barrier. Paying his respects, she said bitterly, or making sure the cleanup went according to plan. Ethan started forward. Clara caught his arm. Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I'm thinking that murderer is standing 30 feet away and I could what? Attack him in front of a dozen cops and news cameras? Give him exactly the excuse he needs to paint you as unstable and destroy your credibility before we even get started? Ethan's jaw worked. Every muscle in his body screamed violence. But he stayed put. They watched Marcus emerge 10 minutes later, speak briefly to a detective who nodded at whatever he said, then climb back into his car and disappear into morning traffic. He's checking his work, Ethan said quietly, making sure Morrison died the right way, covering his tracks. Clara pulled out her phone and called Richard. We need Morrison's autopsy report the second it's available, and we need to know who's doing the autopsy, whether they're independent or connected to the Whitmores. Already on it, Richard said. He sounded as exhausted as Clara felt. Margaret's pulling strings at the ME's office. But Clara, even if we get the report and it shows elevated potassium, that's just one more data point. We still can't prove causation. Then we find someone who can. Sarah Kim mentioned there were others, people who worked at that medical practice who might know something. We start making calls, offering immunity, finding the weak link. The weak link will deny everything, or disappear, or end up like Morrison. So we protect them better than we protected Morrison. How? Clara didn't have an answer for that. She hung up and looked at Ethan, who was still staring at the brownstone like he could burn it down with his eyes alone. We need to get you somewhere safe, she said. Somewhere the Whitmores can't find you or Sophie. This is going to escalate now. They've killed again, they know we're on to them, and they're going to start eliminating threats. I'm not hiding. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be strategic. If something happens to you, who fights for your father? Who protects Sophie? Who finishes this? That got through. Ethan finally looked away from the crime scene. Sophie's already with my sister upstate, he said quietly. I sent her yesterday. Told her it was a surprise visit, but really it's because I'm terrified every second she's anywhere near the city. Good, that's good. Is it? Because I'm lying to my daughter about why she can't come home. Lying about why there are men following us everywhere. Lying about whether her father's going to survive whatever war he just started. Clara didn't have comfort to offer, didn't have reassurance. All she had was the same fear and the same determination to see this through. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. She was getting tired of unknown numbers. Clara Bennett, she answered. You need to stop. A woman's voice. Young, scared. You need to stop investigating and go back to your life before it's too late. Who is this? Someone who's trying to save you. The Whitmores know about every move you've made. They know about Professor Hernandez. They know about Sarah Kim. They know you went to Morrison, and they're done tolerating threats. Clara's blood went cold. How do you know about Sarah Kim? Because I work at the practice. I'm Sarah's assistant, and she's missing. She didn't come to work yesterday. Didn't answer her phone. Her apartment door was open, and her place looked like someone left in a hurry or was taken. Taken where? I don't know, but her computer was gone, her files were gone. Everything that could connect her to the Whitmores was cleaned out. Either she ran or they grabbed her. We need to file a missing persons report. And tell them what? That a woman who called you anonymously about potential medical fraud has disappeared? The police won't care. Or worse, they'll tell the Whitmores, and whoever's left who knows anything will disappear too. Clara closed her eyes. What's your name? I'm not telling you that. I'm not ending up like Sarah. I'm calling because she was my friend and because what they're doing is wrong, but I'm not dying for it. Then help us. Tell us what you know. Give us something we can use to... I don't know anything. Sarah was the one who saw the billing codes, who understood what was happening. I just answered phones and scheduled appointments, but I know enough to be scared. And you should be too. The line went dead. Clara told Ethan what the assistant had said, watched the color drain from his face. They took her, he said. They knew she talked to us and they took her. We don't know that. Maybe she ran. Maybe she's somewhere safe. Do you believe that? Clara didn't answer. They drove back to Vale Industries in silence that felt like a funeral. The security guards followed in a second car, more visible now, less subtle. The Whitmores had stopped pretending this was business. Now it was war, and casualties were piling up. Richard and Margaret were waiting in the conference room with Professor Hernandez on video call. Everyone looked like they'd aged a decade overnight. Morrison's autopsy is scheduled for this afternoon, Margaret said. We have a contact at the ME's office who will flag any anomalies, but even if it shows potassium elevation, it won't matter because we can't prove injection versus natural causes, Clara finished. I know, we've been over this. Then what's the plan? Richard asked. Because right now we have 4 bodies, 1 missing witness, and enough circumstantial evidence to maybe write a compelling news article, but nowhere near enough to convince prosecutors to move. Professor Hernandez spoke from the screen. I've been reaching out to every contact I have in federal law enforcement. Most won't touch this. But I found one prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney named Jennifer Park, who's interested. She's been looking at the Whitmores for years, trying to find something that sticks. She wants to meet with you. When? Ethan asked. Tomorrow. But she's going to want more than patterns and theories. She's going to want proof of intent, proof of mechanism, proof that ties Marcus Whitmore directly to these deaths. We don't have that. Then get it. You have maybe 48 hours before the Whitmores either destroy the remaining evidence or eliminate everyone who could testify. Find me something concrete or this whole investigation dies with Morrison. The video call ended. Clara stared at the blank screen, feeling the weight of impossible expectations crushing down. They needed proof they didn't have, needed witnesses who kept disappearing, needed a system that didn't want to help to suddenly care about justice. There's one person who might talk, she said slowly. One person who's been there for all of it. Who knows exactly what the Whitmores have done because he helped them do it. Who? Ethan asked. Damien Whitmore. The room went very quiet. You want to approach Marcus Whitmore's son, Richard said carefully. The same person who destroyed your career, the same person who's probably been coordinating these murders, and convince him to flip on his family. He's the weak link, Clara said. Marcus is too careful, too controlled. But Damien? Damien's arrogant. Damien thinks he's untouchable, and arrogant people make mistakes. Or arrogant people destroy anyone who challenges them, Margaret countered. Clara, approaching Damien is suicide. He'll either laugh in your face or tell his father, and you'll be the next one to disappear. Maybe. But what choice do we have? We're running out of time and witnesses and options. If we're going to make a move, it has to be big, and it has to be now. Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What are you really after here? Justice or revenge? The question hit harder than Clara expected. Does it matter? She asked. It might. If you're doing this to punish the person who hurt you, that's one thing. If you're doing this to stop them from hurting anyone else, that's different. Clara thought about that. About 3 years of carrying Damien's betrayal like a stone. About every time she'd served food to people who looked through her and imagined it was Damien's face she was smiling at. About the moment she'd decided to stop hiding. Both, she said finally. I want justice for your father and Morrison and everyone else they've killed. And I want Damien to know what it feels like to lose everything because someone more powerful decided you didn't matter. That's honest, at least, Ethan said. Okay, how do we do this? We set a trap. We make Damien think he's winning. We give him a target he can't resist, and we record every word he says. What kind of target? Clara pulled out her phone and opened her contacts to a number she'd deleted and restored a dozen times. Professor Hernandez's secretary, who used to work for the Columbia Law Academic Board, who had access to sealed records from Clara's plagiarism investigation. We tell Damien we have proof he framed me, Clara said, documentation that he falsified evidence, testimony that he lied to the board, everything he thought he buried, and we tell him if he doesn't give us what we want on his family, we go public with it. He'll never believe you have that, Margaret said. He will if we make it convincing enough. If we leak just enough detail that he thinks it's real. Damien's smart, but he's also paranoid. He spent 3 years making sure no one could prove what he did to me. If he thinks that's falling apart, he'll panic. And panicked people make mistakes, Richard said slowly. But Clara, even if this works, even if Damien incriminates himself or his father, we'd be using evidence we don't actually have. That's fraud. That's a crime. It's a bluff. There's no crime in making someone think you know more than you do. There is if you use it for extortion. We're not extorting. We're investigating. Big difference. Margaret shook her head. This is a terrible idea. Too many ways it goes wrong. Too much risk. Everything about this case is risk, Clara shot back. The difference is whether we take calculated risks or just wait for the Whitmores to pick us off one by one. Ethan stood and walked to the windows. Outside, Manhattan was doing its Thursday afternoon thing. Millions of people living their lives, unaware that a few floors above them, someone was planning to burn down one of the city's most powerful families. Do it, he said without turning around. Set the trap. Make Damien think he is exposed. And Clara, if this goes wrong, if he comes after you instead of falling for it, I know the risks. I don't think you do. I don't think any of us do. But we're past the point of backing out now. Clara spent the next 6 hours crafting the most dangerous email she'd ever written. Every word had to be perfect. Threatening enough to scare Damien, vague enough to be legally defensible, specific enough to be convincing. She ran it past Professor Hernandez 3 times, past Richard twice, and past her own conscience more times than she could count. By midnight, it was ready. The subject line read, "We need to talk about Columbia." The body was simple. Damien, I have documentation from the academic board investigation 3 years ago, records that were supposed to be sealed, evidence that shows you falsified materials and provided false testimony. I'm willing to keep this quiet in exchange for a conversation. Meet me tomorrow night at the address below. Come alone. If you don't show, everything goes to the New York Times on Saturday. Clara attached a single document, just the first page of what looked like an official investigation report, carefully edited to show damning evidence while cutting off before any details that could prove it was fake. Last chance to back out, Richard said. He was the only one still in the office with her, everyone else having gone home to whatever counted as sleep these days. I'm not backing out. You know there's a good chance this gets you killed. There's a good chance I get killed whether I send this or not. At least this way I'm choosing the battlefield. Clara hit send before she could change her mind. The email disappeared into the void. Somewhere across the city, it would land in Damian Whitmore's inbox. Would sit there waiting for him to wake up and read it and decide whether to fall for the bait or call her bluff. Everything depended on how well she knew him, how well she understood his arrogance, his paranoia, his need to control everything around him. She'd spent 3 years studying the man who destroyed her. Now she'd find out if she'd learned enough to destroy him back. Clara went home and didn't sleep. Sat at her kitchen table watching the clock tick toward dawn and wondering if she'd just written her own death warrant in the form of an email. Her phone buzzed at 4 a.m. Unknown number. Of course, she answered. Hello? You're either very brave or very stupid. Damian's voice, smoother than she remembered, but with an edge underneath that suggested she'd hit a nerve. I'm guessing stupid. I'm guessing scared, Clara said. Which is why you're calling at 4 in the morning instead of ignoring my email. You don't have anything. You're bluffing. Then ignore me. Don't show up tomorrow. Let me send what I have to the press and we'll see if I'm bluffing. Silence on the other end. Clara could practically hear him calculating, weighing options, trying to figure out if she was serious. What do you want? He asked finally. I told you, a conversation. About what? About your family's business practices. About some contracts I've been reviewing. About some deaths that seem very convenient. Another silence. Longer this time. You're working with Ethan Vale, Damian said. Not a question. I'm working on my own behalf. Vale's just a client. Bullshit. You think I don't know what you've been doing? Who you've been talking to? You're building a case against my family and using some forged documents about Columbia's leverage. If they're forged, prove it. Show up tomorrow and prove I'm lying. Or I could tell my father and let him handle this. You could. But then Marcus would know you're still vulnerable 3 years later. Would know you didn't bury the Columbia situation as well as you claimed. Would know his perfect son has a weakness that could destroy him. Clara was gambling everything on understanding Damian's relationship with his father, on knowing that Marcus demanded perfection and punished failure, on betting that Damian would rather handle this himself than admit he'd left loose ends. Where and when? Damian asked. Clara gave him the address. A coffee shop in Brooklyn she'd scouted days ago, public enough to be safe, quiet enough to have a conversation, with security cameras she'd already confirmed were working. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Come alone, or I walk and everything goes public. I'll be there. And Clara, if you're lying, if this is some kind of setup, you won't live long enough to regret it. He hung up. Clara sat in the darkness of her kitchen, shaking, feeling like she'd just lit a fuse without knowing how long it was or what it was connected to. She called Ethan. He took the bait, she said when he answered. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. I'm coming with you. He said, come alone. I don't care what he said. You're not meeting that psychopath without backup. If he sees you, he'll know it's a setup. He'll walk. We'll lose our chance. Then I'll stay out of sight. But Clara, I'm not letting you do this alone. We're past that now. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some illusion of independence, of control, of being the one making decisions. But the truth was she was terrified. And having Ethan there, even hidden, even at a distance, made the terror slightly more bearable. Okay, she said quietly, but you stay hidden until I signal otherwise. This only works if Damian thinks he's in control. Understood. Clara? Yeah? Thank you for doing this, for risking yourself, for giving a damn about my father and Morrison and everyone else when you could have just walked away. I couldn't walk away. Not from this. Why not? Clara thought about that, about 3 years of invisibility, about the moment she'd answered a phone and felt herself wake up, about every choice that had led her to planning a dangerous meeting with the man who'd destroyed her life. Because some things matter more than safety, she said finally. Some fights are worth having even when you know you'll probably lose. She hung up before Ethan could respond and sat alone in her kitchen waiting for dawn. Tomorrow night, she'd face Damian Whitmore and either expose everything or die trying. Either way, the hiding was over. The silence in her apartment wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the silence before an explosion. And Clara was standing right at the center of the blast radius, holding the detonator, waiting to see if courage and desperation were enough to bring down an empire. Outside her window, the city started waking up. One more day until everything changed. One more day to prepare. One more day to be afraid and do it anyway. Clara made coffee and started planning exactly how to survive the conversation that might kill her. The coffee shop in Brooklyn was exactly the kind of place where people went to disappear into their laptops and pretend the world outside didn't exist. Clara arrived 45 minutes early, ordered something she wouldn't drink, and claimed a table near the back with clear sight lines to both entrances and the street outside. Ethan was somewhere across the street in a parked car with Richard and 2 security guards. They had recording equipment, cameras, a direct line to Professor Hernandez and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park, both standing by in case this went sideways fast. Clara wore a wire taped to her ribs that itched and made her hyper-aware of every breath. Her phone sat on the table in front of her, recording app already running, disguised as a music player. Everything Damian said would be documented, preserved, ready to be used against him. If he showed up, if he didn't just have her killed in the parking lot, if this wasn't the stupidest thing she'd ever done. At 8:55 p.m., Damian Whitmore walked through the door. He looked exactly like Clara remembered. 33, expensively dressed in casual clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be, with the kind of face that made people trust him right up until he destroyed them. Handsome in a polished way. Confident in a way that came from never experiencing real consequences. He spotted her immediately, smiled like they were old friends meeting for catch-up, and walked over with the relaxed posture of someone who owned every room he entered. "Clara Bennett," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "It's been a while. You look different. Waitressing suits you better than law school did." The casual cruelty landed exactly as he'd intended. Clara felt the old shame rise up, hot and familiar, the instinct to shrink and apologize and disappear. She pushed it down. "You look the same," she said evenly. "Still smug. Still playing games you think you've already won." Damian's smile widened. "I have won 3 years ago and again today. You think showing up with some forged documents changes anything? You're still the girl who got expelled for plagiarism. Still nobody. Still powerless." "I wasn't expelled. I was cleared. After the damage was done. After your reputation was destroyed. After everyone who mattered stopped taking you seriously." He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "That was the point, Clara. Not the charges. The suspicion. The doubt. Once that seed is planted, it never really goes away." "You're right about that," Clara said. "Which is why I'm here. Because I'm done letting you control the narrative." "What narrative? The one where you're a failed law student who got caught cheating and spent 3 years hiding in food service? That's not a narrative. That's just what happened." Clara pulled out her phone and opened a file, the fake investigation report she'd sent him, expanded now with additional fabricated pages that looked official enough to pass casual inspection. "Here's a different narrative," she said. "The one where you falsified evidence, where you planted materials in my work and then reported me for using them, where you lied to the academic board because you needed me out of the way." Damian glanced at the phone screen without touching it. "That's fiction." "Is it? Because I have testimony from Professor Hernandez confirming the timeline doesn't match your story. I have access logs showing you were in the library systems when you claimed to be studying alone. I have your practice exams, the ones you said I stole, with metadata showing they were created after you accused me." Most of that was lies wrapped around tiny pieces of truth, but Clara delivered it with enough conviction that she saw Damian's expression flicker for just a second. "You're bluffing," he said, but he didn't sound certain anymore. "Then call my bluff. Let me publish this and see what happens. See if Columbia reopens the investigation. See if your father still thinks you're the golden child when the family name gets dragged through academic fraud hearings." "My father doesn't care about Columbia. Your father cares about reputation, about control, about making sure the Whitmore name stays pristine." Clara leaned forward. "How do you think he'll react when he finds out his son is still vulnerable 3 years later? That you left evidence lying around that could expose you? Damien's jaw tightened. There it was, the crack in the facade, the fear of disappointing Marcus Whitmore that drove everything Damien did. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to tell me about your family's business practices, about the contracts you helped design, about the companies you've helped destroy." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Whitmore Industries, joint ventures with predatory clauses, liquidation triggers, arbitration control. You were in my contract law class, Damien. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you helped write those clauses. That's business, legal business. It's fraud. Systematic fraud designed to trap partners and steal their assets. And it's connected to something worse." Damien went very still. "Meaning what?" Clara pulled up another file on her phone. Morrison's obituary, James Vale's autopsy report, the list of CEOs who died right before Whitmore takeovers. 4 deaths in 2 years, she said. All heart attacks. All following house calls from Whitmore Family Health Services. All with elevated potassium levels that suggest injection rather than natural causes. "You're insane." "Am I? Or am I connecting dots that everyone else has been too scared to connect? Your family kills their business partners, Damien. They trap them with contracts and then eliminate them when it's convenient. And you've been helping them do it." "I haven't killed anyone." Damien's voice was sharp now, defensive. "Whatever you think you know, I know Marcus controls the medical practice. I know he approves house calls personally. I know Dr. Chen follows his orders without question. And I know you helped design the contracts that made these takeovers possible after the deaths. Helping with contracts isn't murder. No, but conspiracy to commit murder is. And if you knew what those contracts were for, if you knew people were going to die to make those deals work, you're complicit." Damien stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. You have nothing. No proof, no witnesses, just paranoid theories and forged documents. Publish whatever you want. No one will care." "Sarah Kim will care," Clara said. "She's ready to testify about the billing codes, about the pattern of house calls and deaths, about Marcus's personal involvement." That was a lie. Sarah Kim was still missing, but Clara needed to push harder, needed to make Damien panic enough to give her something real. "Sarah Kim is irrelevant," Damien said, but something in his eyes suggested otherwise. "Is she? Is that why she disappeared the day after talking to us? Because she's irrelevant?" Damien started toward the door. Clara's heart hammered. She was losing him. Losing the one chance to get him on record saying something incriminating. "Your father killed Ethan Vale's father," she said loudly. Loud enough that other people in the coffee shop looked over. "James Vale, 2 years ago. House call from Dr. Chen, potassium injection, and you knew about it." Damien spun back. "Lower your voice." "Why? Afraid someone might hear? Afraid the truth might actually matter?" He moved back to the table, leaning down close enough that Clara could see the rage barely contained behind his perfect facade. "You want the truth?" he said quietly. "Fine. Here's the truth. My father is a businessman. He makes deals. Sometimes those deals benefit from unfortunate timing. Sometimes competitors have health problems. Sometimes life is just unfair. None of that is illegal. None of that is murder. It's just the way the world works. Convenient deaths aren't just timing. They're planned, executed, covered up." "Prove it." "Oh, wait. You can't. Because you're a waitress with a grudge and some circumstantial evidence that doesn't mean anything." "It meant enough to scare you into showing up tonight." Damien smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I showed up because I wanted to see if you'd really grown a spine in the last 3 years. Wanted to see if you'd actually follow through or if you'd fold the second I called your bluff." He straightened. "You folded, just like I knew you would. Enjoy your coffee, Clara. Enjoy your little fantasy about bringing down my family. And when you're done playing detective, go back to serving food. It's all you're good for." He walked toward the door. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. This was it. The moment where she either let him walk away or committed to something she couldn't take back. "I have recordings," she called after him. "From tonight, from this conversation. You admitting your father benefits from deaths. You admitting there's a pattern. I have it all recorded and it's already uploaded to servers you can't touch." Damien stopped, turned slowly. "You're recording me?" His voice was very quiet now, very dangerous. "Every word." And before you threaten me or try to grab my phone, know that Ethan Vale is across the street with security and lawyers and a federal prosecutor who's very interested in everything you just said. Clara was gambling everything on the wire working, on the recording being clear enough, on Damien's admission being damning enough to matter. Damien walked back to the table, sat down, looked at Clara with an expression that mixed calculation and something that might have been respect. "You set me up," he said. "I gave you a chance to tell the truth. You chose to incriminate yourself instead. I didn't admit anything. I made vague statements about business practices and unfortunate timing. No prosecutor would touch that. Maybe not by itself, but combined with the autopsy reports, the billing codes, the contract patterns, the witness testimony we're gathering, it's enough to start an investigation, enough to get warrants, enough to make your father's life very difficult." Damien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its mocking edge. "You really think you can take us down? You think one recording and some medical records will destroy the Whitmore family? I think 4 bodies and a pattern of systematic fraud is enough to start. And I think once prosecutors start digging, they'll find things even I haven't found yet. Because people like your father don't commit just one kind of crime. They commit dozens. And once the investigation starts, it doesn't stop until everything's exposed. My father has resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, connections, enough money to make this disappear and you along with it." "Then why are you still sitting here? Why not just leave and let Daddy make it all go away?" Damien looked at her with something that might have been weariness. "Because maybe I'm tired too. Maybe watching him destroy people for profit gets old after a while. Maybe there's a part of me that knows this has to end eventually." Clara felt her breath catch. "Are you saying you'll testify?" "I'm saying I'll think about it. I'm saying that if prosecutors offer immunity, if they guarantee protection, if they make it worth my while, I might tell them what I know." "What do you know?" "Everything." Damien's voice was flat. "I know which CEOs were targeted and why. I know how Dr. Chen administered the potassium. I know where Marcus keeps the documentation proving premeditation. I know all of it because he made me part of it. Said I needed to learn the family business. Said getting my hands dirty was the only way to earn real power." Clara's heart was pounding. "Tell me. Right now. Give me something I can use. Not here. Not like this. If I'm going to burn my family to the ground, I do it properly, with lawyers, with deals, with guarantees that I don't end up in prison or dead. You helped kill people. You don't get to walk away clean. Then I don't walk away at all. Your choice, Clara. Use me as a witness and maybe get what you want, or throw me in prison alongside my father and lose the only person who can prove what really happened." Clara wanted to scream, wanted to tell him he didn't deserve immunity, didn't deserve protection, didn't deserve anything but consequences. But she also knew he was right. Without his testimony, they had patterns and suspicions. With it, they had proof. "I'll talk to the prosecutor," she said finally. "But Damien, if you're lying, if this is just another game, it's not a game anymore. It stopped being a game when Morrison died, and I realized I was complicit in murder." He stood again, slower this time. "You wanted the truth? Here it is. My father is a killer. He's been killing for years, and I helped him because I was too weak to say no. But I'm done being weak. I'm done watching people die, so the Whitmore name stays powerful." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "That's my lawyer. Have your prosecutor call him. We'll set up a meeting. I'll tell them everything. Why should I believe you'll follow through? Because you destroyed me tonight, just like I destroyed you 3 years ago. Because you proved that I'm not untouchable. And because for the first time in my life, I'm more afraid of becoming my father than I am of disappointing him." Damien walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Clara sat there shaking, staring at the business card, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone was still recording. The wire was still transmitting. Across the street, Ethan and Richard had heard everything. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. "Holy shit! Did that just happen? Did he just offer to testify?" Clara typed back, "I think so. I don't know if he'll actually follow through, but we have the recording either way." She picked up Damien's lawyer's card and walked outside. Ethan's car pulled up immediately, and she climbed into the back seat where Richard was already replaying the audio to make sure they'd captured everything. "This is good," Richard said, headphones half off his ears. "This is really good. He admitted knowledge of the pattern. Admitted his father's involvement. Admitted watching people die. He didn't admit direct participation, Clara said. Any lawyer could argue he was speaking hypothetically. But combined with everything else we have, the contracts, the autopsy reports, the billing codes, this gives prosecutors leverage, something to use when they approach him officially. Ethan was twisted around in the front seat, looking at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. You were incredible. The way you pushed him, made him think you had more than you did, got him talking. I got lucky. He was already on edge, already questioning whether this was worth it. You gave him permission to question it. You showed him there was another way. Ethan's voice was rough. That took guts. Clara felt tears threatening and pushed them back. What now? Now we call Jennifer Park, give her the recording, set up the meeting with Damien's lawyer, and we wait to see if he's serious or if this was just him buying time to plan our deaths. The next 72 hours were the longest of Clara's life. Jennifer Park, the assistant U.S. attorney, listened to the recording 3 times before speaking. Then she spent 6 hours on the phone with Damien's lawyer negotiating terms for proffer sessions, interviews where Damien would tell them what he knew in exchange for consideration on immunity. The first session happened in a federal building in Lower Manhattan with enough security to stop a small army. Clara wasn't allowed in the room, but she waited outside with Ethan while Damien spent 4 hours telling prosecutors everything. When the session ended, Jennifer Park emerged looking like she'd just been handed evidence of every crime she'd ever wanted to prosecute. He gave us Marcus, she said simply. Gave us Dr. Chen. Gave us the medical practice manager who's been helping cover tracks. Gave us documentation showing premeditation for 4 murders and conspiracy for 6 more that were planned but not executed. We have enough to bring charges, enough to get warrants, enough to tear the whole operation apart. What about Damien? Clara asked. What does he get? Immunity from murder charges in exchange for testimony. He'll plead to fraud and conspiracy. Probably serve 5 years minimum. But he won't die in prison for his father's crimes. It wasn't justice. Not really. Damien had helped kill people and he'd walk away with a fraction of what he deserved. But it was more than they'd had yesterday. When do you move on Marcus? Ethan asked. Tomorrow morning. Simultaneous raids on his home, his office, and the medical practice. We'll arrest him, Dr. Chen, and anyone else involved. After that, it's a matter of building the case for trial. He'll fight, Clara said. He has resources, and we have his son's testimony, documented evidence, and a pattern that spans years. Marcus Whitmore is good, but he's not good enough to beat this. Jennifer Park looked at Clara directly. You did this. You found the pattern. You pushed until something broke. This case happens because you refused to stay quiet. Clara didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and scared and uncertain whether any of this would actually stick once Marcus Whitmore's lawyers got involved. But she nodded anyway. The arrests happened at dawn. Clara watched the news coverage from Ethan's office. Marcus Whitmore led out of his brownstone in handcuffs, Dr. Patricia Chen taken from the medical practice, 5 other people whose names Clara didn't recognize, all rounded up in coordinated raids. The reporters were calling it the biggest white-collar crime bust in years. Federal prosecutors were calling it justice. Clara called it incomplete. Sarah Kim was still missing. Morrison was still dead. James Vale was still dead. Justice that came after bodies piled up wasn't really justice. It was cleanup. But it was something. The trial took 8 months. Marcus Whitmore hired the best lawyers money could buy and fought every charge with the ferocity of someone who'd never faced consequences before and couldn't conceive of facing them now. His defense team attacked Damien's credibility, questioned the autopsy evidence, argued that business practices couldn't be criminalized just because they seemed aggressive. But the prosecution had Damien's testimony, had the billing records, had the contracts with their hidden traps, had the pattern of deaths that couldn't be explained as coincidence, had Dr. Chen's eventual confession after she realized Marcus was going to throw her under the bus to save himself. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on 4 counts of first-degree murder, 17 counts of fraud, and conspiracy charges that carried life sentences. Marcus Whitmore was 73 years old. He'd die in prison. Clara was in the courtroom when the verdict was read, sat in the back row with Ethan beside her and watched a man who'd thought himself untouchable learn what consequences felt like. She didn't feel triumph, didn't feel vindication, Just a hollow sort of relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to get statements. Clara pushed past them to where Ethan was waiting with a car. "You okay?" he asked as they drove away. "I don't know. Are you?" "My father's still dead. Morrison's still dead. Damien gets 5 years for helping murder people. Sarah Kim was found 3 weeks ago, alive but traumatized, hiding in Pennsylvania because she was too scared to come forward. So no, I'm not okay. But I'm something. Maybe that's enough." They rode in silence for a while. "What are you going to do now?" Ethan asked eventually. Clara had been thinking about that question for months. About who she was after the hiding stopped. About what came next for a woman who'd spent 3 years serving food and 6 months taking down a criminal empire. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I got my law license reinstated last month. Professor Hernandez recommended me to a firm that handles corporate fraud cases. They offered me a position." "You going to take it?" "Maybe. Probably. It feels like the right thing to do. Use what I learned fighting the Whitmores to help other people avoid the same traps." "That's good. That's really good." Clara looked at him. "What about you? What happens to Vale Industries now?" "We rebuild. We survive. We make sure Sophie inherits something worth having." Ethan paused. "And I was hoping you'd help with that. Not as a lawyer, as a consultant. Someone who can review our contracts, spot the traps before we walk into them, make sure we never end up in this position again." "You want to hire me?" "I want to work with you. There's a difference. You saved my company, saved my daughter's future, avenged my father. I figure that makes us partners in something, even if I'm not sure what to call it." Clara thought about that, about the strange bond formed between two people who'd been strangers a year ago and were now connected by corporate murder and shared trauma, and the particular kind of trust that came from surviving something terrible together. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not waitressing at your office Christmas parties." Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. Deal. 6 months after the verdict, Clara stood in Ethan's office at what had become their weekly strategy meeting. Sophie was there too, 6 now, perched on her father's desk and coloring while the adults talked about contract structures and risk assessment. "Miss Clara," Sophie said without looking up from her drawing, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, sweetheart. My dad says you helped catch the bad people who hurt my grandpa. Is that true?" Clara glanced at Ethan, who nodded slightly. "Yeah," Clara said. "That's true." "Were you scared?" "Very scared." "But you did it anyway." "Yeah." Sophie looked up from her coloring, studying Clara with the serious expression of a child trying to understand the adult world. "Why?" Clara crouched down so she was eye level with Sophie. "Because some things are worth being scared for. Like making sure bad people can't hurt anyone else. Like helping people who can't help themselves. Like doing the right thing even when it's hard. My dad says you're brave. Your dad's generous. I was just stubborn. What's the difference?" Clara smiled. "Brave people aren't scared. Stubborn people are scared but do it anyway. I'm definitely the second kind." Sophie considered this. Then she went back to her coloring like that settled some important philosophical question. Ethan walked Clara out when the meeting ended, down to the lobby where she'd first arrived a year ago, wearing her only professional clothes and shaking with nerves. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. I know I've said it before, but you don't have to keep thanking me." "I do, though, because you changed everything, not just by saving the company or exposing the Whitmores, by showing Sophie that people fight for what's right, that justice matters even when it's hard, that—" He stopped, started again. "You showed me that too," he said quietly. "Showed me that hiding from grief doesn't work, that running from the past just means it catches up eventually, that sometimes you have to walk straight into the darkness to find your way out." Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "You did the same for me. Gave me a reason to stop hiding, reminded me who I used to be, who I still could be." They stood in the lobby, two people who'd saved each other in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or criminals, everything to do with being seen and choosing to see back. "Have dinner with me," Ethan said suddenly. "Not a business dinner, not a strategy session, just dinner, because I'd like to know more about who you are when you're not fighting battles. Clara felt her heart skip. That's a terrible idea. We work together. We have a professional relationship. We survived something most people couldn't survive. We built something together. And I'd like to see what else we could build if we stopped treating this like it's only about business. What about Sophie? Sophie likes you. Actually likes you, not just tolerates you. Do you know how rare that is? She's met a dozen women I've tried to date in the last 2 years, and she hated all of them. You're the first person she's actually asked to come over for dinner herself. She did? Last week. Said she wanted you to see her room and her stuffed animals and her drawings. Said you seemed nice and she wants you around more. Clara's throat tightened. I don't want to complicate things. I don't want to risk what we've built by being honest about the fact that we care about each other, by admitting this stopped being just professional months ago. Ethan took a step closer. Clara, I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to have dinner. See what happens. Stop being so scared of good things that you reject them before they even start. Clara thought about that. About 3 years of hiding from risk, from connection, from anything that might hurt. About the moment she decided to stop hiding and how terrifying and necessary it had been. About the difference between brave and stubborn. Okay, she said. Dinner. But if this goes badly, if it messes up our working relationship, it won't. You don't know that. No. But I'm willing to risk it. Are you? Clara looked at Ethan Vale, single father, CEO, the man who'd trusted her when she was nobody, who'd fought beside her, who'd shown her what it looked like to care about something more than safety. Yeah, she said finally. I'm willing to risk it. Dinner turned into dinners. Dinners turned into Sophie's birthday party where Clara helped organize games and cut cake and felt like maybe she belonged in this strange little family. Months turned into a year, and one morning Clara woke up in Ethan's apartment to find Sophie climbing into bed between them asking if they could have pancakes for breakfast. It wasn't perfect. Ethan still had nightmares about his father. Clara still flinched when powerful people looked at her too long. Sophie still asked questions about why the bad people had hurt her grandpa and whether they could come back. But it was real. Messy and complicated and real in ways that mattered. 2 years after Marcus Whitmore's conviction, Ethan asked Clara to marry him. They were in his office, their office now, since Clara had officially joined Vale Industries as general counsel, reviewing a contract when he just stopped mid-sentence and looked at her. Marry me, he said. Clara's pen froze halfway through a notation. What? Marry me. Not because it makes business sense, or because Sophie needs a mother, or because it's the expected next step. Marry me because I love you. Because you make me braver. Because I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you. Clara set down her pen with hands that shook only slightly. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only proposal you've ever heard. Still the worst. Where's the romance? The planning? The moment? The moment is now. The romance is 2 years of choosing each other every day. The planning is me realizing I don't want a future that doesn't have you in it. Ethan pulled a ring box from his desk drawer. I bought this 6 months ago. Been carrying it around waiting for the perfect moment. Then I realized there's no such thing as perfect. There's just now and you and me asking if you'll take a chance on the future we could build together. Clara looked at the ring, simple, elegant, exactly right, and felt tears she didn't try to stop. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. They got married 4 months later in a small ceremony with Sophie as flower girl and Professor Hernandez officiating and Richard crying more than anyone else. Marcus Whitmore rotted in prison. Damien served his 5 years and got out to find the world had moved on without him. Dr. Chen died of actual natural causes 8 months into her sentence. And Clara Bennett, former law student, former waitress, survivor, and fighter and woman who'd learned that hiding kept you safe but living made you whole, built a life with Ethan and Sophie that wasn't perfect but was undeniably theirs. She still thought about the people they hadn't saved, Morrison, James Vale, the others whose names she'd never learned. Still wondered if justice that came too late counted as justice at all. But she'd learned something in the years since answering a phone in a restaurant and choosing to get involved instead of staying invisible. She'd learned that perfect justice was a myth, that systems failed more often than they worked, The powerful people usually won, and the best you could do was make winning cost them something. She'd learned that bravery and stubbornness were the same thing looked at from different angles. That sometimes doing the right thing meant doing the scary thing. That hiding kept you safe, but living meant risking everything and being brave enough, stubborn enough, to believe it was worth it. On quiet nights when Sophie was asleep and Ethan was working late, and Clara sat alone with her thoughts, she sometimes pulled up the news coverage of Marcus Whitmore's conviction. Watched him being led away in handcuffs. Reminded herself that monsters could be stopped, that voices mattered, that one person choosing to speak up could change everything. Then she'd close her laptop and go check on Sophie, who slept surrounded by stuffed animals and drawings, and the particular security of knowing her father and Clara would fight anything that tried to hurt her. And Clara would stand in that doorway thinking about all the versions of herself she'd been: the ambitious law student, the broken accused cheater, the invisible waitress, the fighter, the survivor, the wife, the mother figure, and realize they were all the same person, just someone trying to do right in a world that made right hard to find. The phone she'd answered in Meridian had changed everything. But the real change had been choosing to answer in the first place, choosing involvement over safety, choosing to care about a stranger's forgotten phone call, and following that choice into darkness and coming out the other side changed but whole. Years later, when people asked Clara how she'd taken down the Whitmore empire, she never knew quite what to say. The true answer, that she'd just refused to look away when it would have been easier, felt too simple, too ordinary. But ordinary courage was still courage. Ordinary stubbornness still changed the world. And Clara Bennett had learned that the difference between being powerless and being powerful wasn't money or position or status. It was the willingness to risk everything for what mattered, and the stubbornness to keep fighting even when losing seemed certain. Those lessons she carried forward into the life she built, into the family she chose, into every contract she reviewed and every case she took and every moment she chose truth over comfort. The silence in her life had shattered years ago, and what grew in its place, messy, imperfect, real, was better than any quiet hiding could have been.